Good evening and welcome. I am Councillor Dennis Bennyworth, Chairman of Western Area Planning Committee. The members of the committee joining me this evening are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Phil Barnett, Jeff Cant, Hilary Cole, Caroline Culver, Clive Hooker, Tony Vickers, who's the Vice Chair, and Howard Woodaston. The following officers are attending to advise and support the meeting. Mr. Simon Till, Team Leader of Western Area Planning, Ms. Cheyenne Kirby, Planning Officer, Mr. Paul Goddard, the Highways Officer, Mrs. Sharon Armour, the Legal Advisor, and Mr. Jack Karimi, the Clerk. I'm also assisted by Mr. Stephen Chard as the Zoom host. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of the members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant in the council chamber. I can confirm that those present in the chamber are sitting socially distanced and are thus permitted to remove their face masks whilst seated. Parish council representatives, supporters, objectors, and the applicant or agent making a presentation to the committee have been encouraged to do so remotely via Zoom. However, they can also choose to attend in person or remotely from within the Market Street building, for example, from the reception or from the Roger Croft room, or indeed from any public device in any location. The meeting is fully accessible both physically and remotely for any member of the public. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please note that there's a small delay between the live meeting and the streamed session. Now to some housekeeping for those in the chamber. Please ensure that your mobile is on silent. We're not anticipating any fire alarm tests tonight, so if the fire alarm does sound, please leave the council chamber using the fire exits to the far right and convene in the Dolphin car park. And also, if I can just ask members at the close of the meeting to clear their desks and wipe down with wipes. Thank you very much. Do members have any questions about the way this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Okay, on to item number 1, apologies. Mr. Karimi, do we have any apologies for tonight's meeting?
No apologies have been received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 2, the minutes. The minutes from the meeting of the 13th of October 2021 were not ready in time for publication of the agenda, but will be available for the next meeting of this committee. Item 3, do any declarations of interest? Do any members wish to make a declaration of interest? Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lobbied on the first item. And can I just mention Councillor Marsh has put in the chat that he can't hear anything. So I don't know if that affects other members of the public who are trying to listen in.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chard.
I'll communicate with Councillor Marsh.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vickers.
I've also been lobbied on the first item, Chairman.
Councillor Vickers. Councillor Barnett.
Chairman, I am a member of Newby Town Council. I'm also a member of Newby Town Council Planning and Highways Committee where item 1 was discussed. But obviously tonight I shall weigh up all the evidence in front of us and vote accordingly.
Councillor Barnett. Councillor Vickers.
I should have said the same, of course. I'm so used to officers reading it out at our town council meetings, I forget I have to say it.
Thank you very much. No further declarations, members? Councillor Woodaston.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm a ward member for both items 2 and 3, and I've been lobbied by objectors on item 2.
Thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you very much. Now moving on to item number 4.
Councillor Abbs.
Oh, Councillor Abbs, I do apologise.
Yeah, sorry if we're declaring ward. I thought the ward thing was kind of part of it, but yes, of course, the first application is in my ward.
That's noted. Thank you very much indeed. Move on to item 4 of the agenda. For the benefit of those watching, I'll briefly outline the format of each application. Officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings, site plans, and any deemed relevant material submitted on the planning file will be shown as part of that presentation, after which representations can be made from each of the following groups in this order. The parish or town council representatives.
Councillor Wilson's got his hand up. I don't know if that's a legacy.
Council, was that a legacy hand?
It was a legacy hand, my apologies, Chair.
That's fine. The running order is parish or town council representatives, followed by objectors, then supporters, the applicant and or agent, and finally ward members. Speakers will be invited to join the meeting in order, either by Zoom or in this room. Each speaker or group of speakers will have a maximum total of 5 minutes to make their case to the committee. Therefore, a group of speakers will need to agree a way of sharing their time allocation. It would be useful to do this now if you've not done so already. Following this, committee members will then have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the speakers. Finally, committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the officers. The committee will then debate the application and then vote on the decision. There are 3 applications on the agenda for this evening. The first of those, 21/01911/FULD, land adjoining number 11 Pond Close, Newbury. Number 2, 21/02022/CERTE, land at Coldborough Hill, Eastbury, Hungerford, Lambourne. And finally, number 3, 20/02922/FUL, number 39, Newbury Street, Lambourne. And starting with the first of those, Miss Kirby, up on screen. Sorry, indeed. Thank you very much. Would you like to begin your presentation?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just start the presentation for you. I confirm that everyone can see that.
I have land adjoining 11 Pond Close slide in front of me.
Perfect, thank you. This application is a full planning permission for land adjoining 11 Pond Close. The proposal is for...
Sorry, Chair, if I may, sorry to interrupt, but I'm very concerned that if Councillor Marsh cannot hear us still, which has been put in the chat, therefore the public can't in fact hear us, in which case we're actually doing this incorrectly.
So I think that Miss Kirby can hear and she's in a different part of the building. So I'm assuming it might just be Councillor Marsh's issue. So
We're
whether
sure about this. I just wouldn't like to be going. Yeah.
Perhaps he needs to log out and log back in because sometimes that works. I don't know if I think Mr. Chard's probably communicating with him. So.
As long as we're sure.
I'm seeking to do so. If it comes, I'll bring David into the virtual room. I'm just trying to do that and communicate that. So as quickly as possible, I'll bring them back in.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. He can actually phone into the meeting as well if necessary. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Kirby, I do apologise. Continue.
Okay. This application is for the removal of derelict garages and erection of two dwelling houses and 2 flats, together with associated landscaping and parking. This has been brought to committee because there's been over 10 letters of objection received, and the Office of Recommendation is approval subject to conditions. The application will be for 2 2-bedroom houses and 2 3-bedroom flats. The application site is located within a residential street within the settlement boundary of Newbury. The site is currently occupied by garages and hard standing and constitutes previously developed land. At the western end of the application site is proposed a two-storey detached building comprising of the 2 flats, a 3-bedroom flat on the ground floor with 2 parking spaces and a private amenity space to the west of the building, and a 3-bedroom flat on the first floor with 2 parking spaces and private amenity to the east of the building. At the eastern end of the application site are 2 2-bedroom dwellings with 2 parking spaces, each located to the front and each having private amenity space to the rear. The site has been subject to 3 previous planning applications. The first one was in 2012, and that was for 8 1-bedroom flats. This went to Western Area Planning Committee and then was subsequently refused. This then went to appeal and was dismissed. The 3 elements of appeal were down to character of the area, amenity space, and highway safety. The appeal was dismissed on character of the area and amenity space, The development was close to the front boundary and appeared cramped, which was exacerbated by the lack of space to the rear, deemed that the scheme was not in accordance with the SPD or character of the area. However, the inspector found that the site was in an accessible location and the provision of off-road parking and cycle storage was acceptable. The provision of pavement was considered a benefit to pedestrian safety and additional carriage width to allow passing point for cars and larger vehicles, including refuse lorry, was acceptable. The inspector determined that the development would not give a rise to additional unacceptable highways conditions. There was a second application submitted, and that was for three-bedroom detached dwellings. This was refused by delegated and subsequently went to appeal again in 2013. This appeal was on similar three reasons for refusal: character of the area, amenity space, and highway safety. Again, this was dismissed on character and appearance of the area and amenity space. The design materials were considered in keeping with the area, along with the short front gardens interspersed with parking spaces, which would maintain the rhythm of the existing building line. However, the depth of the gardens and size of amenity space was not in accordance with council SPD, and the lack of space to the rear made the development appear cramped and out of character. However, the inspector agreed that the provision of 6 off-road parking spaces and cycle storage was sufficient and agreed with the previous appeal decision. More recently, there was an application for 2 two-bedroom dwellings and 4 one-bedroom flats at the site. This was refused in 2020 by officers and subsequently went to appeal. This was also dismissed. However, the grounds were just on affordable housing. Policy C6 of the core strategy states that 20% provision of affordable housing on sites of 5 to 9 dwellings, unless justified via submission of viability assessment. A viability assessment was not submitted or provision of affordable housing. Therefore, the application was refused on policy C6. However, the inspector did state that the provision of 6 dwellings within the settlement of Newbury would make a positive contribution to the council's housing land supply, which weighs in favour of the proposal. Furthermore, the inspector was agreed that the proposal would lead to the development of previously developed land as a distinct from greenfield land. This application has been found acceptable in principle, as the application site is situated within the settlement boundary of Newbury, which is one of the settlements in which policies ADPP 1 and C1 say there will be presumption in favour of development and redevelopment. The current application is for the provision of 4 dwellings, therefore there is no requirement for affordable housing to be provided. The proposed scheme is considered in accordance with policies CS14 and CS19, as both buildings are of an acceptable design and are proposed to be finished in materials to match dwellings in Pond Close, which are of a brick and tile finish. A condition has been added to ensure that the materials blend well with the existing street scene. Some of the objections raised refer to the flats not being in character with the street. However, this is primarily a residential area, and while 2-storey houses are predominant form of housing, the design and height of the buildings to accommodate the flats with 2-storey appearance and hip roof blends with the design of the houses within Pond Close. The Quality Design SPD sets out guidance for assessing the amenity space provision for residential development and requires for 2-bedroom houses to have a minimum of 70 square metres, and for 3-bedroom flats from 40 square metres of communal space per unit for flats. The proposed site plan indicates an area to the front of the units. I'll just try and find it clearer. So there we go. For individual space. However, given its size and proximity to the pavement, it does not offer private amenity space and excluded from the calculation. The proposed dwellings and flats are considered to have suitable amenity space in accordance with the Quality Design SPD. The committee report sets out the concern was raised by residents about the impact of the proposal on privacy and loss of sunlight and daylight, particularly to the residents of Elizabeth Avenue, which are located to the north of the site. The proposed dwellings are located at a sufficient separation distance as set out in the Quality Design SPD. Along with the proposed closed boarded fence along the rear boundary, there will not be a significant loss of sunlight and daylight to surrounding properties in Elizabeth Avenue or 11 Pond Close. In assessing the previous appeals on the site, neither the inspector raised concerns about the impact of the proposal on living conditions of existing occupiers in Elizabeth Avenue. Therefore, the proposed flats and houses are not considered to harm the living conditions of adjoining occupiers. A significant concern raised by residents was the impact on highway and pedestrian safety, as well as resident parking. The highways officer has assessed the application and recommended approval as the proposal meets policy P1. However, this approval is subject to conditions, including a section 278 and a section 38 agreement for the carriageway widening and footway being provided and dedicated as public highway. An ecologist survey has also been submitted and no protected species would be affected by the development, and ecological enhancements have been recommended and secured by condition. This is the view looking north of the current site.
Ms. Kirk, can you just hold fire one moment, please? We're getting quite a bit of feedback from the mic there. Mr. Child?
Can you just speak once more, Sharon, please? It might be okay now.
Okay. This is the view looking north from Pond Close. Is that
That's fine. Thank you. Carry on.
No problem. These are the existing garages on the application site. Here we have a photo looking west along the road. This is a photo looking east, and it shows the current road width on which residents are concerned with. The proposal will seek to widen the carriageway, and this will be agreed. This will be provided through the conditions as set out by highways. This is another photo of the site looking east, further up the road. As you can see from the photo, some residents have provided off-road parking for themselves. And this is the view looking north from Pond Close. So you can see the difference in levels between Pond Close and Elizabeth Avenue. And that is it. Bye.
Thank you very much. And thank you for putting up with the technical hitches we had there. We move on to highways now, and comments, please, from Mr. Goddard. Mr. Paul Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. As mentioned by the planning officer, Cheyenne Kirby, this proposal has been before. A proposal for development on this site has been on this site a number of times in the past, on 3 occasions, and on all 3 occasions, the planning applications were refused. They were only ever refused on highway grounds on a technicality. Being that if you're going to widen sections of the road, you need a legal agreement to enter in to do that. No planning applications were ever refused on highway safety grounds. And I must recommend to you that a similar decision is arrived at this evening, because the proposal before you is actually smaller than previous submissions, being 2 houses with 3 bedrooms and 2 flats, with 2 bedrooms. To comply with the council's car parking standards, some 7 parking spaces are required. The proposal is provided with 9 spaces, so it more than meets your car parking requirements. Cycle storage has been provided along with electric vehicle charging points. To access the 7 car parking spaces, the accesses are provided where there is already access to the public highway. No new access points have been provided with this proposal. The accesses are all existing. Cheyenne, I was wondering if you could share the layout plan. That's it. Thank you. We've had planning applications on this site for about the last 10 years, and I've visited the site a number of times over the years, including with the planning application last year and early this morning with this proposal. The local hire authority has long been aware that the pond close is narrow, some 4 metres wide, just about with a squeeze enough for 2 cars to pass. To alleviate that concern, there is a section fronting the site that is to be widened, a distance of some 30 metres, covering some 2/3 of the site. Now, looking at that drawing there, you'll see on the right-hand side that some of the existing dwellings to the south do have their own on-site car parking. But dwellings a bit more to the left of your plan, for instance, number 10 and number 12 shown there, they park on street. And to ensure that larger vehicles, obviously including emergency vehicles, can get by, which is why your highway officers have insisted that pond close is widened along this section to 4.8 metres, which is our standard road width for all new estate roads. Also fronting the site is a 1.5 metre wide footway going along the entire frontage, which helps provide facilities for pedestrians as well, not only for the development but for all residents along Pond Close. I would expect from 2 houses and 2 flats for there to be some 20 vehicle movements per day, up to 20 vehicle movements, 10 in, 10 out per day. From a high risk point of view, I would suggest that is not a significant impact. It may be a bit of an increase in Pond Close, but I would remind members of paragraph 111 of the National Planning Policy Framework that states that planning applications should only be refused on highway grounds if the impact is severe. That severe bar is very high, and in my view, I do not think with the expected vehicle movements, the fact that the proposal more than complies with your parking standards, the fact that a section of the road is being widened by way of mitigation, your highway officers recommend approval of this proposal. If I can just refer you to condition 3 of your report, that there is a small typo there. It should say section 278, not section 78. Thank you, Chairman. That would be all from me from now.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. We now turn to our members of the public and representative from Newbury Town Council, Mr. Nigel Foote. Mr. Foote, if I ask you to take the lectern. If you keep your mask on until you reach the... Oh, no, okay. Thank you. Mr. Foote, thank you very much for joining us this evening. You'll have 5 minutes to make your presentation. After 4 minutes, we'll give you a warning. And then with 10 seconds to go, I'll say, and in conclusion. I'll then ask you to stop, and then members may have questions of you after your presentation. So when you're ready, we'll start the clock.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, my name is Nigel Foote. I'm current chair of Newbury Town Council Planning and Highways Committee. This application came before Newbury Town Council Planning and Highways Committee on the 23rd of August. And out of interest, when I checked on the planning portal last night, our recommendations are not yet on the current planning portal. It's the meeting previously. So just to bring that to your attention. Our finding at that meeting was that we registered a strong objection based on it being an overdevelopment causing potential parking issues and limiting emergency vehicle access. At that meeting, Newbury Town Council members observed that this application is the fourth application for this site heard over the last approximately 10 years. And we had great sympathy for the residents of Pond Close, who consistently argued that Pond Close, as originally constructed, could not accommodate a development of this nature with the inherent parking difficulties and limited access for emergency vehicles that would ensue. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair. I'd be very happy to answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, any questions, please? Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Foote. I'm interested about your comment with regard to parking issues when there are 9 parking spaces, which is in excess of the recommendation of our highways authority. So why are you concerned about parking when there's sufficient parking provided?
I think from memory, members of the committee were concerned that there's a lot of on-street parking in that area at the moment, and that it was possibly unlikely that residents in these proposed dwellings would have just simply one car. There may be more than one car. There would obviously be visitors to those houses and flats as well, and that would increase the vehicle traffic. And as everyone knows who's been to that site, it is an extremely narrow road. So that was the observation that members had.
Councillor Cole, you. Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Councillor. You mentioned about when originally constructed Pond Close, and I've looked at that myself. I wonder if you could expand on further, because obviously what we're looking at that's being converted is, in fact, parking and garages and so on. Do you have any more you can share with us on that, the originality of the design, and were those, parking spaces and, were they associated with the houses or meant to be associated with the houses?
Well, I'm afraid I've not lived in Newbury long enough to know about that, but I believe the estate was built in about the 1950s. As we all know, there was a lot less car ownership in those days, and I think historically those garages have been there for a while. I think, to be honest, it has probably helped the current residents of Pond Close to get cars off that very narrow road on that space. As you know, it's been fenced off now. That's not possible. So I think it's a historic feature of the design of those buildings back in the 50s, when car ownership was not such a common thing, and cars weren't so big. Of course, cars were much smaller in those days than they are now.
So am I correct in concluding you think the car parking provided with that was built as part of the overall development when it was built, correct?
Sorry, could you say again? Sorry, I didn't.
So, Abs, I'm just going to ask: is relevant to the?
I'm trying to get to this original statement when it was originally built, part of Nigel's presentation to us. No, not when it was built. Just that, is it associated? I can ask the question again later on of someone else. It's fine.
Yeah, I think that might be. I mean, it's not part of this application as far as the application stands.
I'll come to that later on.
Yeah, I take that. Thank you very much indeed. Members, any further questions of Mr. Foote? Mr. Foote, I think you're free to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be good enough to mask yourself back up and take your seat again. Thank you. We now come to objectors, and I have two. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I have two objectors, Lorraine Pladdingbowl and Rachel Reeve. You've seen how this goes. You'll have 5 minutes between the two of you. And if you'd like to take the lectern, socially distance as much as possibly can. And the same applies. We'll give you a minute's warning, and then 10 seconds to wrap up. And in conclusion, So long as the microphone's showing red, you should be good to go. Yeah.
Okay, so good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Collectively, the residents of Pond Close object in the strongest terms to the proposed development. I'm sure that those of you who attended the site saw the strength of feeling we actually have. The applicant has never approached us about any of the proposed plans that have been put forward. We're just residents who want a safe place to live. The Close is a very narrow single lane with only one entrance and exit point. Visibility at the entrance is poor due to the slight bend in the lane as you enter. If this application is approved, the Close will become a dangerous claustrophobic corridor. Every resident, visitor, tradesman, and God forbid, emergency service vehicle will be playing Russian roulette as to whether they will meet a vehicle coming the other way. Residents will be forced to walk in the road as cars will have to park fully on the pavement. We have many young children in the Close now, and approving this application will put them unnecessarily at risk. Photographs submitting to the council over many years we've been fighting plans like this clearly showed vehicles having to drive on the area proposed for development to get round cars that are parked legitimately outside their own houses. The Close was built in the 50s, and planners at that time had the forethought to provide an area for cars to pass, as well as the garages for all residents living on the south side, as these houses did not have driveways. Up to the point when the applicant erected the fence, the area was regularly used for resident, visitor and tradesman parking, turning point for large vehicles and a safe passing point for all. This was a crucial space for us, and we did look after it, contrary to what the applicant would have you believe. It is only since he has erected the fence denying us access that the land has become in a state of decay. The applicant suggests that all residents have off-road parking now. This is not the case. A few residents were forced to create off-road parking at huge cost to themselves, both in pocket and the loss of their gardens due to the arrival of the fence. Not all residents in the Close are able to do this, in particular the residents who live opposite the proposed flats. Their vehicles, which include a transit van and a camper van, park on the road directly opposite the proposed parking spaces for the flats. How will these cars get out? Or are we suggesting that residents who have lived in the Close for over 30 years are not going to be able to park once the flats have been built? Suggesting that this proposal is smaller than the previous one already rejected by West Berks and the Planning Inspectorate is misleading. The size and position of the buildings is the same, which raises the identical concerns as before. And in fact, the occupancy within the flats will be higher, as the intention for flat 1 is to occupy 6 people and flat 2 occupy 5 people. And these flats won't be occupied by families, but by multi-occupancy tenants, all of which are realistically like to have a car. And with only 5 car parking spaces allocated to flats, residents can already see that this will become a real issue, posing a serious and genuine threat to the safety of the residents, new and old. Proposed development does include passing point, but we believe the number of dwellings the applicant is proposing will mean in no time at all the passing point will just become an area to park the extra cars. Furthermore, whilst the applicant makes great play to provide electric car charging points, the likelihood of injury to an adult or child from a near silent electric vehicle emerging from these restricted view parking spaces and driveways will be very high. The Close is very family oriented. We don't have flats in the Close or indeed in the surrounding area of Pond Close, and this type of housing is just not in keeping with a residential type of area, let alone the Close. Like with all other applications, I must point out we are very concerned about access for large vehicles, including, of course, emergency services. There's no turning circle at the end of the Close. The Close is very prone to flooding and has experienced water pipe issues. The addition of more dwellings will exacerbate these issues. And we are extremely concerned about the huge inconvenience the building works will create to all residents. The likelihood we will be trapped, as there is only one entrance and exit. We're not experts in planning, nor are we responsible for supplying housing in Newbury. We're just honest, hardworking, taxpaying citizens who chose a quiet and safe place to live, who are being subjected
to 1 minute now.
Endless planning applications, which will without doubt cause irreversible damage to the Close and detrimental to the safety of its residents. This development is just too big. The financial gain that the applicant will achieve from this development will be nice for him, but the legacy of his greed will be an abject misery for the residents of Pond Close, as tensions will grow between a close-knit community, as accessibility and parking are permanently reduced and our safety forever compromised. Before making your decision, we plead with you to think of the effect to the existing residents rather than whether the proposed plans meet official standard requirements. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members, Councillor Vickers, I have you first.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions, if I may.
Is your computer muted, Councillor Vickers?
Right, I will mute. Sorry. Yes. Get me down. I've been muted now, I think. Sorry.
No, I didn't actually set my audio when I was asked to because we shouldn't be.
Okay.
Am I okay to proceed? There's sort of
Councillor
conversation
Vickers,
going across my front, but yes, thank you, Chairman.
Please ask away.
Yeah, sorry about the sound issue. I have two questions. The first is you've referred to multi-occupancy in the flats. What has led you to think that they may be occupied by 6 adults all using cars? Because I couldn't find anything about that in the
states it in the application document that was on the thing, but you're not going to get a family in there. Families aren't going to buy a flat.
Okay, I'll
with
pick
no
that up with the
garden.
planning officer, but I couldn't find anything in the documents on the website that it was multi-occupancy. I mean, the other question I was going to ask is you've talked a lot about the loss of your parking as one of perhaps the main concern. Would you regard that as being part of the general amenity which in the first application was accepted by the inspector as a reason for dismissing the appeal? I mean, is parking for yourselves part of your general amenity, would you say? That's a nod. Can we have that minuted as a yes, Chair? Maybe she doesn't understand. I will ask for a definition of general amenity later.
That's noted by Mr. Corrigan, thank you.
I don't understand what you're saying,
No.
because I'm sorry.
There is a term called general amenity. Maybe you don't know what it means.
No.
Your private amenity is your garden space, etc. But there's a general amenity to the neighbourhood.
Okay. Yes,
would you?
We as residents were always renting those from the council. We always rented our garages that were there, and then when they got derelict and left, we were parked on there, and it was all absolutely fine. But now we can't park there.
Understood.
We've gone through so much to try and get some traffic off of the road that we can, but still there's lots being said about people walking down the pavement. You can't get down the pavement.
I understood. I think you've answered my question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam. I think that covers the question, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Barnett.
Through you, Chairman. You mentioned the word flooding in your presentation.
Yeah.
Now, I can recall back in, well, I think it was February 1974, when I actually canvassed down that road. And I had a rather mishap. Luckily, I was young then, otherwise it had been broken leg. Now, the whole area was covered in ice because of springs at the back of Woodridge. Can you confirm that happens on a regular occasion in the winters?
Yes. It does. It always gets ice.
Well, it'll get flooded and it'll get ice, particularly there. I mean, obviously we're up high, but where we would park our cars and where the proposed development is not up high. That's low. So all of the water will run off of our gardens into the new development, basically, and it will become flooded. It's very boggy. It's called Pond Close for a reason. There's, we've always got green grass, so there's always a lot of surface water everywhere. And, it's on a slope.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ladies, for coming along tonight. A couple of questions, if I may. You mentioned about emergency vehicles. Have you ever known of an incident where emergency vehicles haven't been able to enter the close?
Yes.
And my second question is, there appears to be some sort of turning area outside property 21 on the diagram that we've been given. You mentioned that there isn't a turning circle. Can you comment on that turning area? Does that give adequate opportunity to move?
Well, it's not been designed as a turning circle, and it's more of a 3 or 4 or 5 point turn circle, depending on how many cars are down there that are parked on the road.
And sorry, the question about emergency vehicles as well.
Yeah, on that one, this occurred just after the applicant put up this fence, which is now been pushed back, and we had to push that back to get an ambulance down because it could not get past. The ambulance could not get past, and so the residents came out and manhandled it back so that it could pass.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Members, any further questions of our objectors? No, Councillor Hook.
Thank you. I was just following up on Councillor Culver's question. I think what she was alluding to was maybe not so much the fence, but previously with the parking condition, could emergency vehicles get down there, or have you experienced problems because of the parking that vehicles couldn't get down there, not so much moving of the fence?
Before any fences were erected, no, never.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Members, that's, yeah, no further hands. Ladies, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Supporters, no one speaking in support of this. I can now move on to the Mr. Andrew House of AD and E Property. Mr. House, thank you very much for attending this evening. When you're ready, if you'd be good enough to turn on your microphone, and then we'll start the clock. And as before, I'll give you a minute warning and then 10 seconds to wrap up at the end of your piece.
Thank you, Chairman. This application will deliver a combination of 2-bed houses and 3-bedroom flats, enhancing the mix of housing stock in this residential area of Newbury. All have been designed to be affordable, possibly for first-time buyers, and also to utilise a brownfield site that is currently used as or unused and an eyesore detracting from Pond Close. The application takes direction from the reasons for refusal of previous applications by reducing the level of housing density being applied for, increasing the amount of off-road parking, and increasing the area of amenity space provision. The site has redundant concrete garages and an extensive area of concrete hard standing, and transforms this into a well-designed development, including trees, grass and soft landscaping, as well as taking account of the biodiversity requirements. The housing design has been considered that of style, positioning, and the heights of dwellings within Pond Close, as well as the outlook of housing backing onto the development from properties fronting Elizabeth Avenue. Proposed buildings are subservient to the surrounding properties within Pond Close. The development will provide high-quality accommodation comprising a pair of 2-bedroom semi-detached houses and 2 3-bedroom flats, each having an EV charging point and 2 dedicated parking spaces. An additional visitor parking space is also included fronting the highway that will be widened for an extended length, and the insertion of raised curbstones in sections to enhance pedestrian safety on that footway. This application acknowledges the unopposed detail of my previous scheme in last year, remaining unchanged in design, parking, access, landscaping and biodiversity, all of which have been approved by the councillors' consultees. I respectfully request that you support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. House. Members, I'm turning first to Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for coming along this evening. You mentioned a few things there, but mainly that it's disused or unused, a facility. When did it become disused, and why did it become disused?
When it was sold by or at auction, it had been not used in the near past of that, and everybody who had been using it was asked to leave. My understanding is everybody who was using it and renting the garages, that was fairly minimal, and they were asked to leave. And certainly one of the applications that was taken to the planning inspectorate said that parking was prohibited or shouldn't be on that site.
So am I correct on that? It became unused because people were kicked out from using it then?
Prior to it being sold, yes.
Okay, so so it's unused on a technicality, I guess is the thing I made. You also mentioned a high quality design, I think, of the house there, correct?
Yes.
Great, excellent. I can't really see anything in here in the documents that I found out that talks about to what level of sustainability you're building. Can you give me some clue as to what standard you're building to?
In terms of what BREEAM standard or whichever standard is, no.
So you don't know, or you're not doing to a standard?
My architect said that it would be to a high standard, a high quality standard, but the actual specification he hasn't been written down at this point.
Did anybody mention CS15 at all during any conversation?
Not that I have had with my consultant or my planning consultant.
Thank you. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir, for coming along tonight. I've got 3 questions, if I may. You mentioned about affordability, but I didn't quite catch what you said about how many of them would be affordable. That's my first question. My second question concerns the fact that the flats are 3 beds and they all seem to be double bedrooms. So I was just wondering what kind of family or occupancy you would envisage needing 3 double beds. I don't know whether that's a planning consideration, but it would seem to me to back up other members' concerns about it being multi-occupancy as opposed to for a family. And my third question, I just want to clarify, we've said this evening that the pavement's going to be widened, but I think I'm correct that you just said that the pavement would be raised for the safety of pedestrians. So could you clarify that, please?
Right, in reverse order. The footpath, the footway will be 1.5 metres as per as what the highways officer said, and there will be raised sections in front of the properties where vehicles are not required or won't be traversing from the highway onto the property. Size. The architect had designed it so that, our application that was refused when we were asking for 4 one-bedroom flats. Because everything else was acceptable by the council in terms of design, access and everything else, as I've stated, rather than get into a redesign of the buildings in terms of size and everything else, we simply reduced the flats from 4 to 2. And therefore, the best use of the space was to make bedrooms capable of holding or accommodating double beds. So, and as a result, yes, you can get, there is sufficient space there for essentially 4 people on 5 people in one flat and 6 people in another.
And the other question was about affordability.
Affordability, yeah. Because they are smaller than the general houses within the area, they will be more affordable for a greater number of people.
Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions for you. One is, if you like, a sort of multi-part. I think depending on how you answer the first bit, I might have supplementaries. And the other is really triggered by something you said earlier about the site being sold at auction. Can you tell me, so I'll take that one first, if I may. Can you tell me what the site was advertised as at auction? Was it advertised as a site that had no parking on it and didn't need to retain any parking?
Councillor Vickers, is that?
Well, it's a question relating to something that the applicant has already mentioned.
I'm not sure.
And it will be pursued by me later in the debate.
I think maybe that might be the place for that, Councillor Vickers. I'll take advice then, Mrs. Arnold.
But I'm not sure. Sorry, I forgot to put my microphone on. I'm not sure how it relates to planning.
Well, I can explain. It is to do with land use classification, and when a site which was an integral part of the general amenity for the residents of this close was sold, was it sold without any conditions attached to its future use?
Chairman, may I interject? This has veered away, in my view, from planning matters into matters of land ownership and transfer, and those aren't relevant to planning.
I agree, Mr. Till. Councillor Vickers, do you have anything?
I'll go on to my other question, if I may, Chairman, which is really not exactly associated, but it's to do with the site. And you've claimed in your presentation, Mr. House, that you are providing additional off-street parking. Yes, there is one spare, if you like, visitor parking space over and above what you are required to have by our policy. I'd like to know, particularly given the fact that there is private access through that space to a gate that leads to 53 Elizabeth Avenue, how you're proposing to manage that, and whether it's for your visitors of the new dwellings, or is it for the visitors of the close in general? How is it going to be managed? Who will own it? I suppose that ownership is not a planning matter, but I think the management of the site is a planning matter, because we've got to be sure that it's going to be looked after.
It was an additional parking space for visitors.
I'm sorry.
Why did you provide it? That's what I'm
Mr.
interested in.
Councillor Vickers, I'm going to turn to Mr. Till, please.
Chairman, once again, we're venturing into matters of land management, land transfer. They're not planning matters, I'm afraid, Chairman.
Councillor Vickers, is that you done?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hook, I had you next, but your hands disappeared. Are you out? Councillor Hooker? So, no? Members, any further questions of Mr. House? No, Mr. House, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. And please take your seat. If you turn the mic off, thank you very much indeed. We now turn to the ward members. Councillor Vickers, I believe you're not taking part in this part of the presentation. We have Councillor Marsh joining us on Zoom. Mr. Chard, if you escort Councillor Marsh into the chamber, please.
Thank you.
And Councillor Abbs. Councillor Marsh, you know the form. I don't have to tell you. I believe Councillor Abbs would like to say something within this 5-minute slot, if that's going to sit well with you.
Well, I wasn't aware of that in advance. I've got 5 minutes worth. How long does Councillor Abbs need?
He assures me it's not a great deal of time, which he admitted from him was quite a rarity.
If you can give me 40 seconds, David, that would probably be enough.
Would 40 seconds, would that be okay with you, Councillor Marsh?
It's fine, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a ward member, I wish to say a few words in support of the residents of Pond Close. Nearly every one of them attended last week's site meeting. And may I begin by saying they're not NIMBYs. The site has been allowed to become an eyesore, and I think they'd love to see something done to make it more attractive. There are lots of possibilities for it, including appropriate development. But sadly, however, in my view, this development is not appropriate for various reasons. I won't dwell too long on the history, but as we've heard, when Pond Close was built in the 1950s, the garage area was mandatory. And for many years, it provided parking for residents of houses without driveways, as well as a passing place and a turning area. Now all that is gone, and I feel that this council, as the original landowner before Sovereign took the site over, has a duty of care to residents, not to make their lives worse, which I think this development undoubtedly would do because of the additional traffic and parking problems that the development in its current form would engender. It's much the narrowest residential ward in my ward, and I've never seen a narrower one anywhere in Newbury or indeed West Berkshire. It's basically a single lane. There is not enough room for two cars to pass each other on the road without going onto the pavement. The proposed widening that we've heard about, in my view, in front of the flats would not resolve this problem, which goes on right down the road. For the committee members who weren't able to make the site meeting, I do hope the plans make it clear. You really have to see it. The opening to the road is exceptionally narrow, and then it bends. So as soon as you pass the bend, you immediately come to the site on your left. I've driven into Pond Close only the once. I cycle there now, because even with a small car, it's really hard to get in, turn and get out again. The problem is much worse for emergency vehicles and recycling lorries, which have to reverse the length of the close to get out because there is nowhere to turn. They used to be able to turn on the site before it was fenced off. They still need to reverse over part of the site, which they won't be able to do any longer. So I don't know what they're going to do if the development goes ahead. And the photographs that we saw, I'm sorry to say this, they were really misleading, taken when there was nobody parking in the road. That never happens. I don't know whether they were taken at 3 o'clock in the morning, but they were very misleading. I could show you many, many photographs, and the residents could, of that road virtually blocked. So we heard that Newbury Town Council has objected to the application. We've heard about the ambulance that residents had to assist to reach a stricken resident. On the question of the multi-occupancy, the planning officers may not be aware of the fact that it's proposed to be multi-occupancy. We've just heard in the applicant's own words, five or six people in each of the flats. That's not the number of car parking spaces that are being provided. That is a lot more if they've got cars. Now, yes, as we saw in the photograph, some residents at their own expense have turned their front gardens into driveways. But the houses immediately opposite the site, which are most affected, are rental properties. And unless sovereign decide to turn their front gardens into driveways, those people cannot do this. They have to park on the pavement. And meanwhile, pedestrians have to walk in the road. I've seen people with children in pushchairs walking up the road to get past the parked vehicles. And this problem, in my view, will be worse if this development goes ahead. Another safety issue is that even supposing they can get out because of all the vehicles parked opposite, the field of vision for the residents of the new flats driving out of the parking spaces would be limited because of the bend in the road and because the line of sight is blocked by the garage of number 55 Elizabeth Avenue, which we saw at the site meeting. This presents a real safety risk for pedestrians, other vehicles, and indeed the new residents themselves. As we've heard, previous applications to build on this site have been rejected by this council after very similar discussions. The applicant had his chance last time, but instead of scaling back his ambitions,
Councillor Marsh, that's 1 minute left in total.
He has cynically, in my view, reduced the number of buildings to below the affordable homes threshold, but increased the number of people who will live in the development. So to give Councillor Abbs a chance, I'm going to finish now and quote one of the residents: "I urge you to please end our misery and refuse this overdevelopment." And I support that view, and I hope that members will say no to this application. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Grateful to you, Councillor Marsh, for cutting that short.
How many seconds do I have?
The clock has stopped, and I'm reliably informed.
30 seconds. Hang on, let me take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath.
I'm not sure I'll be able to pause in when I speak. Okay, thankfully, David has mentioned most of the things I wanted to mention anyway, but a couple of things to keep in mind as a ward member. We're losing a 42-metre parking strip and handing it to development. Anything we hear further from there is going to be a card of tricks. It's a magic trick to make it look like it meets our standards. I don't think it can. Okay, so I'm going to use my 30 seconds or keep it rather short. I'll stop on that point because fortunately David made most of the points I wanted to make. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Members, I'm turning to you for questions. And I'm seeing no hands. No. Councillor Marsh, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Abbs, thank you for your your brief chat. Thank you very much. Members, questions of clarification of the officers. I have Councillor Vickers first. Councillor Vickers.
Can I ask first, am I allowed to refer to matters in the update sheet which were actually not alluded to by officers, but which are presumably up for questions as regards clarification? So I'll just ask two questions at this stage and then see what other members have. I may have some others if they're not already asked by previous members. So firstly, you talk about the car club idea not being relevant, but if a car club is seen as a proper condition for a large strategic site not that far away as something that a developer should contribute to, why is it out of the question that a site where the existing parking is clearly inadequate could not have a similar condition? And doesn't really, part of the same question, doesn't the fact that the previous appeals, the first two appeal, including the only one that's had member involvement, were way before we had the HSA DPD, which gave us the parking policy we've been talking about, doesn't that change the situation that we're now looking at a matter where that policy P1 should be looked at for the whole community and not just the initial development?
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Mr. Goddard may have supplementary comments to add on this, but in respect to the car club, as refers to smaller residential developments, it is used as an offset contribution where there is a shortfall in parking in urban areas. As you've heard from Mr. Goddard already, there is no shortfall in parking here. In terms of policy P1 refers to parking to meet the requirements of the site. It doesn't refer to offsetting parking to facilitate mitigation of what are historic parking problems associated with non-planning issues, those being land ownership and transfer. So in answer to your question, policy P1 does not address the wider parking situation you're raising concerns regarding, and hanging a car club contribution off that policy would be overstepping the remit of the policy, in my view. Mr. Goddard, do you have anything to comment on that?
Well, not much, Chairman, other to say that yes, a car club is a good idea and the local authority would, of course, support it. But I would remind members that you need to look at the proposal before you rather than trying to solve existing unfortunate problems that occur in the area. Does the proposal comply with your parking standards? And the answer is that yes, it does. In fact, there is a surplus in parking provision for it. And I would ask you to focus on those points. Thank you.
Councillor Vickers.
Before we lose the thread, come back to the term general amenity, which the objectors didn't understand, but which was used in the decision and again by the inspector in dismissing the appeal, that there was overdevelopment caused by loss of general amenity. Doesn't general amenity include loss of existing parking, and shouldn't a new development mitigate the harm caused by the fact that there has been loss of parking as a result of the development?
Mr. Till, I'm going to put that one to you, please.
Chairman, I think some of that is point for debate, but in terms of the question asked regarding mitigating previous circumstances, I think I've answered that quite comprehensively already. Thank you, Chairman.
Just one final one on this thread. Contribution for car club in terms of cash is what we've normally had. We have never yet in this council had an on-site contribution. We have, as has been admitted, one additional parking space over and above what is required. What is wrong with asking or even requiring the applicant to dedicate it for that purpose?
I think that, just taking advice from Mrs. Armour, will be subject for debate. We can leave that.
I've got something that might assist you. If you look at the legislation and the guidance regarding section 106, it's quite clear that it's got to be the harm of the development. And I think what you've also got to bear in mind is whether or not this development goes ahead, the owner could still restrict anyone parking on that site.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Thank you, Mrs. Armour. Councillor Barnett, please.
Chairman, I've got two questions, one for Mr. Gallard and one for Ms. Kirby. Can I present them there?
Yeah, please do.
First for Mr. Goddard, in the update sheet, which refers obviously to the minutes of the 2012 discussions, you refer to 3.9 being the minimum distance across what will be the minimum stretch of the road. Presumably you're referring to the first section of the road, which I would imagine is not changed from the time you mentioned that. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, you are correct. It's about 3.94, 4.1 all the way along, but the narrowest that we measured 9 years ago was about 3.9 metres, and no, that would not have changed over time.
Okay,
And
thank
your
you.
second question, Councillor Barnett?
The question to Ms Kirby, you in your presentation you were referring to the north side of the site and affected residents in what in effect is Elizabeth Avenue, but looking at the drawing and my understanding, looking at the site in depth on the site visit, the affected house where the dip of the land lies is actually backing onto Woodside. I'm correct, am I thinking that?
Ms Kirby, you're muted.
The dwelling that you saw, I believe, was, I want to say 49 Elizabeth Avenue, but the ones to the right were Woodford Avenue. But I believe the one that the visible one that you could see when we were on site, I believe was 37. 30,
Yeah, I've just had a confirmation
41.
from a resident to Ms Kirby.
Thank you.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Barnett? Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Hooker next.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst listening to our objectors this evening, Miss Reeves and Cladding-Ball, which I thought was an excellent presentation, by the way, very good indeed. It was mentioned in there, and in fact backed up by Councillor Barnett, this business of possible flooding around that area. I know it's not compulsory that when one asks for a response from the different agencies, but I see that SUDS came back with no response at all. And in the paperwork that we've got here under flooding, it does say that this area is not risk of flooding from rivers, groundwater or surface water. I think the presenter for the objection did say that there was a spring that came to light above these houses through her garden, runs down the road and then sort of ends up outside possibly where this development is going to go, and obviously ice and everything else. The only thing in here, it does say that this will be dealt with and flooding issues will be sort of taken into account. I'm just two things really. One, concerned that SUDS didn't come back if this is a flooding issue, and the generalisation of how this is going to be overcome as a sort of a statement. I don't know if the planning officer's got a response to that, please.
I will. Thank you, Councillor Hooker. The flooding categorisation under the Environment Agency's flood maps is on the basis of risk of flooding. So it's important to note that just because an area is in flood zone 1 does not mean that it will not flood. It means it is at the least risk of flooding. Many of the places that flooded in the 2007 floods in West Berkshire were within flood zone 1, but experienced an extreme rainfall event that led to large amounts of flooding. The important thing to note in respect of the lack of SUDS response, which is, I agree, very unfortunate where it's an issue that residents are concerned with, is that SUDS did actually respond on the 2020 application, which was for a scheme that is nigh on identical in its built form. And they responded with no objections and a recommendation of a comprehensive drainage condition, which is a similar drainage condition to the one that, in fact, it may even be the same drainage condition as the one recommended in your agenda report. And the third thing that I'd like to note is that the provision of a comprehensive scheme of SUDS requires that calculations are provided for extreme rainfall events, and that all on-site surface water is addressed on-site, dealt with on-site, and does not make its way into the local area to compound flooding problems. So the starting point for SUDS conditions is to seek a betterment in the existing situation where you have previously developed land. And that's just what the SUDS condition that is recommended on this application would do. So in that respect, that's the justification for the officer raising no concerns in respect of flood risk in the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Chairman, my concern was mentioned that this was rising springs, not so much surface water from rain or whatever. I just wanted some clarification and maybe of the extent of what the rising springs were.
So,
thank you, Chairman. I think on that basis, all we have to rely on is the Environment Agency's flood mapping. So we can't provide you with details of the rising springs, but we can confirm that this hasn't been identified as a critical drainage area where there are factors that would compound to excess flooding issues elsewhere. Those rising springs would be included within the fluvial water survey that contributes to that conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Till.
thank you, Councillor Hooker. I've got Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Question to Officer re car parking spaces. Before, when researching this evening, did a little bit of kind of Googling and so on, and it talked about number of average spaces in West Berkshire. And the comment came back up that we had this target of, I must admit it was dated 2007, so some time ago. So please update me on the right number. But we had a target number for the whole of West Berkshire of average of at least 1.5 car parking spaces per home. So does that hold any weight at all, or was everything supplanted post that document?
Mr. Goddard, do you want to take that?
Chairman, yes. Those parking standards were the old parking standards applied nationally with Planning Policy Guidance Note 13 from about 1993. The council's parking standards were updated and became live in May 2017 and replaced those standards. The standards that I've mentioned to you tonight contained in policy P1 that suggests that for 3-bed flats, 2 spaces will be provided, and for 3-bed houses, 2.5 spaces will be provided, which requires 8 spaces, 9 spaces are provided. So the proposal complies with your parking standards. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. The only bit that was I was querying was really the district-wide average that we were trying to achieve that was mentioned back then. And I agree with you. You know, in each individual application now is greater than that standard. But did we encapsulate greater than as a district-wide anywhere in our documentation? I couldn't find it, but I thought I'd check with you.
We did. We were doing an exercise at one stage where I tried to total up all the parking provided, and we were sort of hitting around 1.5 spaces. I did that exercise many years ago, so we were working to it, but it has been since superseded.
Okay, I'll come back to the debate. Thank you, Chair. I just have one other question. Obviously, unless you start putting yellow lines, etc., on a very narrow road, we'll have the issue of parking enforcement. I think someone else has mentioned it already about the houses that are directly opposite. But of course, there's no yellow lines at all in Pond Close. So how are we going to cope basing on an assumption that people are still going to have to street park? How are we going to cope with that in terms of this? Oh, well, emergency vehicles are going to be able to go by because of this, that, and the other. And I do actually want to come back on a third one to talk about the width as you come into Pond Close. And anybody who wants to take a look, just open up Google Maps and Street View. But the question is about parking enforcement. We pass a rule and they're supposed to be in their bays, but will they be in the bays? Can we force them in the bays?
I'll sort of lead on to supplementary for Mr. Goddard from that, if I may. A question I had was, are we content that cars parked to the south where neighbours have made their own provision on their own driveways, is there sufficient space for them to pull out without those parking restrictions I think Councillor Abbs just been alluding to? Mr. Goddard?
Well, firstly, the Highway Authority is not planning to provide any waiting restrictions in. Sorry, if you got all that, because my internet froze just there a minute.
I think we did, yes.
Okay. The local highway authority is not planning any waiting restrictions. Let's assure residents of that. The design has been, including the road widening to 4.8 metres, has been designed as such to allow those residents to continue to park on the road. So they're not affected. And the provision of 4.8 metres is wide enough to enable a larger vehicle to pass. 4.8 metres is what we apply with all our new estate roads. So I know the concern about emergency vehicles, but that is an existing problem. The emergency vehicle already has to get in there to serve 20 dwellings. It will now serve 24. But at least to make the vehicle easier to park cars that will continue to be there and every right to be there, the road is widened to help the larger vehicle to do so. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
It does, Chairman. Can I come back? Because I think we're missing the point here, and I'm not sure Mr. Goddard is answering the question I need answered. You're referring to the widening, which ends at a certain point. It doesn't come all the way down Pond Close, that widening, does it? Or does it?
No, it doesn't. It's only in the area where we know that the vehicles for park. The widening doesn't continue further down because that's where the residents do at least have driveways and have got somewhere to park. Well, it's not possible to widen Pond Close any further. That's not outside the site. Sorry,
Mr. Garland, that's not quite correct, isn't it? It was already evidenced earlier on that there are at least a couple of houses that don't currently have off-road parking. If you go right the way down, they have off-road parking, and if you go all the way up, they have off-road parking. But there's a big block in the middle where they do not, and it happens to be at the narrowest point of entry into Pond Close. And as I say, if you just open up Google Maps, do a street view, drop your camera down, you will in fact see two cars semi-blocking the entrance to Pond Close. So, I mean, I know that we can't introduce evidence, et cetera,
your question,
but you can look on your laptops.
Your question.
The question is, how are we taking care of emergency access at that point of entry, which is we have no control over where people park. So how are we even when I look at the diagram, I can't even say how an ordinary car gets by half the time. And certainly as someone with a buggy can't get by on the pavement either because they're semi-parked on the pavement. So there's a real issue, not necessarily further up Pond Close, but at that entry point of Pond Close as you swing round.
And your question is?
Therefore, how have we really taken safety into account? Because that's the danger spot. Because you can't see it because you've just come around the blind corner.
Mr. Goddard?
I would argue that is an existing problem. Emergency vehicles already need to enter that close to serve 20 dwellings. They will serve 24. The question before you is this proposal going to make that situation so worse that it should be objected to? But 20 versus 24 dwellings, in my view, it is not sufficient to recommend refusal. Yes, there is an existing problem there, but I don't think the development.
I'm going to move on to Councillor Culver, who's been waiting very patiently. If you want to come back with another question, please raise your hand again. Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got a few questions, but I'll endeavour to be as brief as possible. It doesn't say whether or not the emergency services were actually consulted on this. On page 7 of our report, it doesn't say that they were consulted. Usually it will actually say who was consulted, and if there was no objection, it would say that, but they're not actually listed. So were they consulted on this application?
Ms. Kirby, would you like to pick that up, please?
No, they weren't consulted on this application. We have had concern with this particular consultee across the borough, and that even when we do consult them, it is quite rare that they do come back to us. However, it is for the Highways Department as well to make the assessment on whether emergency vehicles can fit down the road.
Okay, thank you very much.
1 second, Councillor Culver. Mr. Till just wanted to come in at that point.
Chairman, as a point of clarity, it is actually for the local highway authority to assess whether emergency vehicles can gain access. We wouldn't normally consult the emergency services over an application on this scale, because actually our concerns for them are things like, can we provide adequate fire hydrants? The local highways authority do concern themselves with emergency vehicle access in terms of the width of road and space for manoeuvring. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that response. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. When we went on the site visit, there was a kind of brickwork bollard, or it looks like the remains of a gateway or something. Can we condition that that would have to be removed? Because I think that was a significant obstruction for any vehicles that want to get through.
Could you identify, Councillor Culver, where that was?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As we entered into the close, where you have the garages on the left-hand side, right on that corner, there's a kind of brickwork thing. It looks like there might have been a gate attached to it once or something. It's just sort of sitting there, and I just wondered if we can condition that that would have to be removed.
Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. We can't add planning conditions on matters that are outside of the applicant's ownership or control. This sounds like land that is outside of the applicant's ownership to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Can I just confirm with officers that elements of the widened road, some will be raised curbs for the benefit of pedestrians and some will be lowered curbs so that cars can enter the new houses? So it would be a mixture of the two.
Mr. Goddard, one for you, please.
Yeah, Chairman, that's correct. Where there isn't parking spaces, there'll be a full height curb. Where there are parking spaces, there'll be dropped curbs, obviously to enable the vehicles to cross the footway as normal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goddard. And finally, Chairman, I know we have rules about outside amenity, but I'm wondering, do we have any regulations regarding indoors amenity? Because it does seem to have a 95 metre square footprint for a 3-bed house with 6 people. Does seem that that would not afford those individuals particularly large area of indoor amenity.
Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. The council itself doesn't have adopted amenity standards, indoor floor space standards, but there are national standards that officers apply when reviewing applications. And it's my understanding that these proposed works are in the region of the national standards in terms of indoor floor space. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor Hooker.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for Mr. Goddard. Mr. Goddard, I'm sure you've seen on the West Berks website and Facebook page last week, where the council is got an initiative for advising and asking people not to park on pavements. And in fact, there's a picture there of a car parked half on a pavement, half off a pavement. I'm sure you're aware of this because it's a highway issue. Would you agree with me that taking away several tens of yards of possible parking space along the front of this development is in fact going to exacerbate this situation?
I would argue that that parking is already been taken away because the land is private. Any vehicles did not have any right to park on it, unfortunately.
Councillor Hooker, is that your question answered? Coming back to Councillor Abbs.
Sorry, Chair, I got lost in my buttons there for a moment. I'd really, for hopefully Mr. Goddard has a chance to bring Google Maps up or something in between, but it's really that curve, that point where you can clearly see, if people are certainly not parking on the pavement, then there's not enough room for a car. So they park off the pavement to allow vehicles to go through. There's nothing in this application that basically eases that situation. We've clearly heard already that the only reason we're in this situation is because the land has become private. But that aside, how do we get over this issue of the safety of people when we can't control that pinch point?
Mr. Goddard.
I think I may have answered this issue. My understanding from Councillor Abbs is that he is concerned about the first stretch of Pond Close coming from Valley Road, which is understandable. Elizabeth Avenue, sorry. And I understand that. But the point that I've made a number of times, will continue to make, is that is an existing issue that emergency vehicles already have to negotiate in order to serve 20 dwellings that are already there.
Yeah, but it's an
includes
issue
refuse
that was
vehicles as
created
well.
by the private owner. The issue was created by the private owner going, you can't park here anymore.
Okay, so
I think Mr. Goddard, you've answered the question.
Thank you.
And the rest we can pick up in debate. I've got Councillor Cant, please.
Thank you, Chair. It feels very much to me as if we're going round and round in circles. I'd just like to be absolutely clear with the highways officer that I think I now understand where we are. This is a street with a long history of issues around parking and access, both for emergency vehicles and for parking of residents, pre-existing any of these applications, I guess. And would it be right to say, Mr. Goddard, that this particular application, in complying with the parking and highways requirements of the council's policies, is not, in a planning sense, adding to that issue? They are merely building on a site in a difficult street.
Correct. The proposal does comply with your parking standards, so it should not act to the parking issue. And going back to what was said previously, I would argue that the proposal actually improves matters for emergency vehicles, because we have a wider section of Pond Close that isn't there now. That section would be public highway, and also there'd be a 1.5 metre wide footway fronting the site, so which isn't there now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cant. Councillor Vickers.
I'm just coming back to this. I mean, officers have said that the land is private. The land was private when Sovereign owned it. Surely its use class, which is what we're talking about, its planning use class doesn't change until we allow a new development, which we haven't yet done, although we're recommended to doing. So isn't the land we're talking about entirely currently a use class of parking for the existing residents, whoever owns it?
Apologies, Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's important to avoid conflating the two ideas of private ownership and use class. The use class of the land is residential, and it is previously developed land, and that is its planning use. In terms of whether it is used for parking or whether it is used for residential development, the planning use doesn't change between the two. The historic issue of private ownership that keeps being referred back to here is not something that we in planning can seek to address. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Thomas, Councillor Vickers. Good on. Okay, thank you very much. Members, any further questions of officers? No, I'm going to open this up now for debate. Who'd like to start me off, please? Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I'm actually not inclined to kind of approve this development at all. The more and more I listen throughout this the conversation, the more we haven't answered the basic questions of safety, and we've barely touched at the issues that are associated with potential flooding and so on and so forth. The residents don't deserve this build. I'll have a ponder. I'm not ready to do it yet. But I'll have a ponder as to reasons why we should not go, and I'll bring back that recommendations once I've had a bit of a ponder.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. I'm going to turn to Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. I have considerable sympathy with the issue about a piece of land which I guess has historically been available for parking irrespective of its ownership, and is now being sold to a private developer who wants to build on it, and the inconvenience and difficulty that brings for local residents. However, I think the questions asked Mr. Goddard about whether, in fact, this development within the constraints of the planning policies would actually enhance the difficulties already being experienced by the residents. And for him to be quite clear, I think, about that isn't the case. Those issues will continue, whether or not this development goes ahead. I personally see absolutely no coherent, practical planning reason to go against the recommendation of the planning officer, and I will be voting in favour of that recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm sitting here with a sense of deja vu because I sat on the committee in 2012 and we are revisiting all of the arguments that we heard that evening. The site is a derelict site, and it was derelict when I visited it in 2012, and it was in the ownership of Sovereign then who put in that application, I believe. And although it's a brownfield site, and therefore there's a presumption, there's got to be a presumption in favour of development, and also, unfortunately, residents have become used to parking on this derelict site. We've got to bear in mind that the owner is perfectly entitled to fence it, even if they decided not to redevelop the site. However, I'm disappointed that the applicant has reduced the number of dwellings in order not to provide affordable housing because it doesn't meet the 5 dwelling threshold that we at West Berkshire fought long and hard to maintain, because we know we need affordable housing, and instead has created 2 flats which are capable of becoming houses of multiple occupation. And so I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Marsh's comments on that aspect. And I would personally prefer to see a new application come forward which delivers a more appropriate housing in this location, because it's self-evident that looking at the number of planning applications that have been considered over the years, that this is a site which is extremely difficult to develop out. And I understand the applicant wants to do it for commercial gain, but I think we've also got to bear in mind the effect on the amenity of the residents, and I don't feel that this application and this proposal is the right proposal for this site. And I accept that the planning officers and the highways officers have given it great consideration, and I respect their judgment in saying that it is that this application could be approved, but I feel that I cannot support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. At that point, I was going to turn to another member. I just want to underline to members the fact that this, as Councillor Cole just alluded to, has been through the mill over the years, both in front of this committee and with the planning inspector. And the planning inspector was clear at the last appeal that the only issue that they had was as far as affordable housing, or the lack of affordable housing provision was concerned. I just want members to bear that in mind, that was the sole reason for refusal. I'm going to turn then to Councillor Vickers, please.
Chairman, just to deal with that last remark of yours, if I may. Members haven't had a chance to comment on any application since the very first one, where Councillor Cole was the only one of us present who was part of that meeting. Now, if officers only refuse an application under delegated powers for one reason, that doesn't mean, surely, that we can't raise additional reasons which, having looked at all the evidence, we think there are. So if I just make that point before moving on, and I do hope that those of you who couldn't make it to the formal site visit have managed to see the parking, because I have to say, Chairman, that apart from this parking issue, I'm quite content, and I would indeed commend Ms Kirby for her excellent report. And other officers have also looked at it with fresh eyes. After all, there's 9 years have gone by, and we will have changeover of officers as well as members. But this former garage site, which was land allocated for parking the cars belonging to the residents of Pond Close in the 1950s, and has remained part of that general amenity, or thought to be part of their general amenity ever since. I don't think it's right that should be taken away from them. They now have no convenient place safely to park their cars legally. So why should that space be removed in order to cram in as many dwellings as a new developer can get away with? We don't seem to have a policy in our local plan, or indeed in national planning policy, that distinguishes land for communal but purely residential parking from brownfield land generally. And probably every ward in the country has an estate of this sort of age with this sort of block of garages. And I think we need to treat that lack of a policy very seriously. And this is an issue, as I say, which could come up anywhere. And I think we need to also look at the latest version of the MPPF, where some of the paragraphs have changed, and I'll come on to that. But when these houses were built, people were only just beginning to own one car. There was lots of public transport. It's now a completely different world. And the average private car parked in Pond Close at the moment, and anywhere in the country, is sitting somewhere parked 95% of the time. That's why I look to car clubs to provide a solution, because they provide a far more efficient use of that embedded carbon in the manufacture of a car and of the land that we all know is very short, in our urban areas. Now, it's taken 11 years since I proposed to the racecourse developer that they widen the eligibility for their car club to all the residents of Newbury. And there still isn't land allocated by that developer on their vast site for a car club car. So that's another area of policy. I mean, it shouldn't just take cash from developers. We should require them, in cases where there is clearly a shortage of parking, to make land available for that purpose. Otherwise, we're not going to get a car club that, under the aspirations of the new provider, Enterprise, they're aiming to have 50 cars throughout the district, not just in central Newbury, within 5 years. So we need to look at that policy urgently and to think of car parking in these estates that are going to come up for redevelopment all over our district fairly urgently. Now, I did ask officers to consider this immediately after the site visit last Thursday to see if it would be accessible. But sadly, the applicant would rather have this spare parking space turned into mown grass than to put it at Enterprise's disposal. And I know the transport policy officers support the principle of what I'm saying. So turning to the history of the site and the documents publicly available and what people have said. The first application was refused by this committee, as we know. And Councillor Cole was the only one present that is here now. But an objector then quoted in the minutes, and we referred to the fire service already, that time wasted moving cars would cost lives. Now think of that, time wasted moving cars, which is bound to happen if we allow this to go ahead. Probably happens now without it going ahead, but certainly it will be worse later. It's going to cost lives. Criticism of sovereigns being made by many. They were depriving their tenants of parking, and their tenants are still unable to improve the situation that they face. Inspector at that time said of this application that it was detrimental to general amenity. And one of the reasons for refusal by this committee, upheld by the developer, was that there was existing parking which was going to be lost. That, I presume, is what he meant by loss of general amenity. However, he went on to say something which I find quite extraordinary in his report, that it would not be reasonable to require any re-provision of the unauthorised parking or garage spaces as part of the proposal. I mean, if it was being refused for loss of general amenity, then how can you uphold an appeal? Highways commented then, and they're still commented on the incidence of roadside parking. We know why that's happened. But objections on the grounds of harm to general amenity were absent from the decisions under delegated powers on the second and the third applications, although they were still present from all the other consultees like the Newbury Town Council, Newbury Society, and of course all the residents. So today we have the first chance for 9 years to debate the matter. And since then, we've had policy P1, part of the HSA DPD of 2018. We've had a 2019 revision of the MPPF, and our local plan has become somewhat outdated. So surely we can look at it in the light of that. Now, last Friday, I returned to Pond Close at 3 p.m. during working hours to count off-road spaces. There are 26 spaces off-road for 20 homes, most of which are 3 beds. So under policy P1, were it to be considered as something we should be maintaining for existing residents rather than just providing for new ones, you'd need to have 40 to 50 spaces for this little community of Pond Close. Now, I doubt that there's the potential for the current owners to create more than 5 or 6 more spaces. So the under provision of parking, if we were to approve this, for that whole development will be between 10 and 20 spaces. There were 7 cars parked on the road when I went there, of which I reckon 3 would have been preventing an emergency vehicle getting through, and 2 were totally blocking the footway. Those spaces were available until the site was sold. And if it is necessary for new development to meet the requirements of policy P1, how can it be unreasonable that that can only be done by taking away the same standard of parking from the houses that are already there? It just defies reason to me. So I believe that we should refuse this application, and we should expect to see a development that comes forward which has some new housing, but which, first of all, considers the needs of the existing residents, mitigates the harm that has been done to them by what's happened since Sovereign sold the site, and look at possibly a condition. I mean, the only alternative to refusing is to look at a condition turning the visitor space into parking. As I say, I'll conclude by what I said at the beginning. This is not just about this site. This is going to happen all over the district in developments of this kind. And we've got to have a policy that ensures that any redevelopment doesn't harm the existing general amenity of the residents of those estates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I know we're in debate, members, but I'm going to turn to Mr. Till, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I'm afraid that I need to, having heard the comments in the debate thus far, inject a word of caution from your officers. We have indeed, as you've already alluded to, Chairman, had a recent February 2021 appeal decision on what was, in built form terms, an identical scheme to the one that is proposed in this application. The inspector had in front of him the comments from Newbury Town Council and the objectors, and he had the comments from the local highways authority and the planning officer, which were similar to the comments made on this application. The inspector, had he taken the view that these concerns regarding parking and amenity were relevant in terms of the works in front of him and were contrary to our policies, would have added refusal reasons on those grounds. As it was, the inspector refused on affordable housing alone. Turning to the concerns regarding the 2012 decision, I really should point out that the policy context in 2012 was quite different to the policy context today. We had adopted the HSA DPD in 2017. The National Planning Policy Framework has been through 3 different iterations in that time, and it is vastly redundant to refer to comments made by a planning inspector in 2012 in determining a planning application today. It would be, if that was put in front of an inspector, it would be likely that the inspector would conclude that the policy decisions being made were on the basis of out-of-date policy. Which brings me to my concern in terms of the potential for costs being awarded. Members should be careful that if refusing this application following the debate, they provide clear reasons for the decision to do so, which are formulated on the basis of the current policy position and are not formulated on the basis of concerns regarding transfer of land or previous policy concerns from 2012. I hope that helps members in their consideration during the debate. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Till, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to look to Councillor Barnett.
Well, Chairman, I'm going to perhaps make an observation that in response to what Mr. Till's just said, I don't know whether it was a sort of a quiet frightener, but I'm still prepared to continue on with the thrust of my comments, which I feel is very much relevant. I've had the pleasure of obviously sitting through 3 discussions, not in this chamber, but other chambers in the discussion process leading up to the earlier applications. And one must say it's nice to think that the chamber is now opening up to the public, and it's nice to see the public present, because applications such as this, of course, does attract a large number of residents. And I can recall the earlier discussions at the other place where we had discussions. The discussions were quite lively, to say the least. So it's quite nice sometimes to hear a little bit of hissing, booing and cheering. And they've been very good tonight, haven't they, the residents? But the issue regarding the application, what we've got in front of us, to me, it's a very difficult one. And it's a difficult one because the circumstances really have not changed in relationship to the earlier applications, albeit perhaps policy has changed. And the situation to me is, look, we've got a narrow road. We've got a narrow road which is difficult to access. We've got a road which is changed over the years, and Councillor Vickers is actually spot on. In the days when this was built, and I lived in the next road, Hill Close, so I know the estate well, in the early days when it was built, 53, 54. And there was hardly any cars at that area at all. And if my memory serves me correctly, because I'm not one for policy, but as some people will tell you, I tend to remember certain little aspects. And if I remember correctly, there was 2, if not 3 buses down Elizabeth Avenue each hour. So you had the opportunity to go into the town, north part of the town, wherever you want. And I think some even went on to Batcham. So there was a good chance of using public transport, but we're in a different situation today. Most people do have 1, 2, and some people even have more cars on their drive or on the road. And if this is correct, we're not absolutely certain it's correct, but if it is correct that some of those houses or apartments or what they're going to be can be occupied by a large number of adults, not necessarily families, of course it's going to generate a lot of cars. And that, to me, is a grave concern. Displacement of existing vehicles, perhaps, if it's, and the comments were being made about there could be restrictions, or it might be the ideal way to look restrictions parking. I think that is not the way forward, and it's going to affect the quality of life of the residents. And we're not here, I don't think, to actually deter the quality of life for the existing residents. I think we need to look at it closely in relationship to what would enhance the residents. It is a derelict site, and that site is no similar to several other sites where you've got old garages that need to be demolished and buildings put on the site. But I think the site is not really adequate for the type of buildings that's being proposed, and it's going to affect the actual access on and off the site and other people's access. Furthermore, the comment I made early on about the flooding, and when I asked the question about how regularly the road floods, I was already led to believe 1974 is not an isolation. I think there's been several other occasions. Mr. Till mentioned about 2007. Yes, that was in the whole of the district there was effects, but there's been several other winters. In the earlier discussion, Councillor Pick made the presentation from Newbury Town. If you speak to Mr. Peck, he lives at the back of Woodridge. And he would tell you honestly that the back of his land that dips down towards the back of Pond Close regularly creates springs. The whole of that area is subject to springs. And we are supposed to be looking, aren't we, Councillor Vickers, at the moment, about land which is going to be possibly, and you mentioned it already, Councillor Hooker, about this SUDS issue. And I have some grave concern about that. Is another area where we're going to, in effect, build on land and therefore subject to further perhaps service water. So I don't know what I would be able to put forward to as a proposal against, but we've already had a proposal, I think, from Councillor.
I haven't taken a proposal yet.
Oh, sorry, I thought Councillor can't put a proposal forward. Sorry,
that was the hand.
Sorry, I'm rattling on. Sorry, Councillor Abbs.
Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much. Oh, guess what? I'd propose that we reject, unfortunately, the officer's recommendation based on my ponderings of safety of access along the whole of Pond Close. It does not accord with the standard required by the council, and no control mechanism is suggested to ensure safe access. So that would be my first reason for saying no. Second one is things have evolved, as has been pointed out many times, and we are meant to be delivering net zero homes. The applicant clearly didn't know about that, wasn't interested in that. We have a CS15 policy which could be exercised here. The wording is to be tested, but this is an opportunity to test as part of an overall rejection, I feel. There's a high risk of occupancy as a HMO. If they want a HMO, they should apply for a HMO. I believe that's a planning consideration, but maybe the officers can correct me. Loss of general amenity, which was brought up earlier, and then obviously Councillor Barnett just mentioned SUDS of water. I'm not sure exactly about the wording around that one, but that would be my proposal to refuse. Of those are the conditions associated with the refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Does that find a seconder, members?
It does, Chairman. I'd like to second, and particularly, I mean, I think it's still overdevelopment caused by loss of general amenity. And I'm sure officers can help find reasons, but I have looked at the latest NPPF, that's the 2019 version, carefully to see if I can find reasons that might help defend that decision if we were to vote for it.
Well, perhaps Councillor Abbs and Councillor Vickers, you can get your thinking caps on, because we will need some words to put to that proposal when we get there. I'm myself nervous. I think this will be judged against policy. I think our officers have given very clear reasons why we should grant permission for this. But I take the proposal and I have a seconder. Councillors, any further debate on this, please? No further hands. I'm sorry, I'm going to turn to Mr. Till.
My apologies, Chairman. I need to make a statement in respect of part of the proposal, and that relates to the zero carbon provision. The council's policy does not seek zero carbon for minor residential development. It has a provision for major residential development, and that is currently being contested in the Sandalford appeal, but it doesn't have a provision for minor residential development. Therefore, I'm concerned that if members accept and resolve to progress this recommendation of refusal, including that part, that they will be directly contrary to the policies of the council's local plan.
Thank you, Mr. Till.
I'd accept Mr. Till's advice myself on that particular grounds for refusal. Sadly,
I think it was Councillor Abbs, though, who...
Sorry, Chairman, if you just bear with me, it's about 30-second carry on. I'm just looking
Councillor
up, because when I
Vickers,
read the words earlier, I thought we could use it.
While Councillor Abbs is looking for that, can I just draw officers' attention to certain paragraphs in the NPPF that, and indeed members, that might help Or is that premature? We should vote first.
Councillor Abbs.
Well, I'd like to come back on that, yeah, because I quickly looked it up again. So sustainable policy CS15, sustainable, etc. So residential development doesn't say anything about major. That comes renewable energy later on. From 2016, all development doesn't say minor or major. Code for Sustainable Home Level 6. We know that was parked, but we know what sustainable, because the Code for Sustainable Home was meant to achieve. So therefore, we have a document that we can go to and said, we should be doing this by since 2016. Therefore, I'm confident that that should be tested at another level. And until we test it, we don't know how true it will be. We will have opinion up until that point. So,
Mrs. Armour.
Can I let Simon answer that question? I've got issues with some of the other reasons for refusal,
Okay.
so it's probably best we deal with CS15 first.
Thank you, Mrs. Armour. Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. The Code for Sustainable Homes issue is a separate issue from the zero carbon issue within policy CS15. Policy CS15 did, before it was disbanded, seek compliance with Code for Sustainable Homes. Separately, it applies a requirement for a reduction in CO2 emissions for major development. It doesn't apply that same reduction for minor development. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Till. Mrs. Armour.
yeah, so if I may just jump in, when I read the Code for Sustainable Home, specifically about level 6, which is what we're talking about, it clearly says the home will have to be completely zero carbon. That statement is built in that document. So I'm struggling to understand why we can't use it.
Mr. Till, and we had this at the last meeting, actually, didn't we? Where
I can be very clear on that, Chairman. The Code for Sustainable Homes no longer exists, and the renewable energy requirements of policy CS15 stand apart from its reference to Code for Sustainable Homes.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Mrs. Armour.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify a few points. In terms of the highway safety, are you saying that the 4 houses are making the safety worse?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of SUDs, is the condition not sufficient, or?
Because it was mentioned by another councillor. So.
Councillor Vickers.
Yes. If members would like to just benefit from what I was reading this afternoon under the 2019 MPPF, or should we wait until after the vote, because it may be redundant to provide detailed reasons.
We'll wait. I've got Mr. Goddard who's got his hand up at the moment. I'm going to turn to Mr. Goddard.
Chairman, I'm sorry to have to come in, but I'm quite concerned about the potential highway safety reason. Considering there's been 3 proposals on this site for proposals that were larger than this, and highway reasons for refusal on safety were never included, but they are being proposed for a scheme that is actually smaller than the previous proposals. Each proposal went before a planning inspector, which never found concern on highway safety grounds. I am concerned about how we would defend this at appeal, and whether we wouldn't go down on costs. I just need to remind members that the proposal complies with your parking standards. No residents' car parking is being lost by the proposal itself. All on-street existing parking is being provided. And in fact, the road is being improved by widening for 30 metres. Obviously, it's your decision makers, but I feel it's my duty to raise this concern that we will have difficulty defending this at appeal, and we may go down on costs.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. I must say I do share your concerns on those points. Mr. Till, please.
Chairman, I deeply apologise for having to interrupt the debate again, but I need to understand the reason that the SUDS condition is inadequate, because that at appeal will be something that we will be asked to defend.
Councillor Abbs?
I can't expand on that one because it was a different councillor's input. I mentioned it. Happy to take it out if we don't think it stands any as a reason.
I'd rather it was taken out as well, because I think the condition is actually adequate.
Okay, fine.
It's really just that we were stressing that that's something that maybe should be given particular care and maybe even come back to committee before, for discharge when we have it, because after all, we don't have the moment an extant flood risk management strategy. That's something that's coming up shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Culver.
I'm not to butt in, but I would agree with that. I brought up the issues of SUDS purely because there was no response from SUDS. And I just want some clarification of the extent of the springs. And as long as we were happy that the drainage conditions that are in here for surface water or whatever was adequate. So I didn't intend it to be anything to appeal on.
Thank you, Councillor Hooker. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it not the case in policy that we're obliged to look at cumulative effect of flooding and not just flooding for one development at a time? And could we not cite that as a reason to reject it because sufficient consideration hasn't been given to the springs and therefore to the cumulative impact of flooding?
Thank you, Chairman. You could cite that as a reason for refusal, but I'm concerned that the evidence provided is on the basis of word of mouth at this meeting and not any technical survey that's been carried out that indicates that there is a cumulative concern with flooding in the area. In fact, the technical survey, which is the survey carried out by the Environment Agency, categorises the land as flood zone 1, and therefore it would indicate that there isn't a cumulative risk of flooding in the area.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Hooker, is that that's an old hand. Members, we're done with debate on this one? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the recommendation is that the Service Director, Mrs. Armour.
Sorry, before we do vote, can I possibly, Mr. Till, maybe summarise the reasons again, just so that everyone's clear what we're voting for? I think that might be helpful on the reasons for refusal. And also if Councillor Vickers has got anything else to say that he wants to add about the MPPF that he wants to add in.
Thank you, Mrs. Armour.
Thank you, Chairman. At present, I have that the application would fail to provide zero carbon development and therefore is contrary to the requirements of policy CS15, because I believe that is still within the proposal. And I also have that 4 houses will unduly increase the risk to highway safety associated with access in particular and parking in the vicinity of the site, and that the imposition of restrictions on parking that those 4 houses will cause will unduly impact on the amenity and quality of life of local residents.
Councillor Abbs, does that...
Chair, pretty close. Thank you, Mr. Till. I mentioned safety of access along the whole of Pond Close. I didn't actually mention parking in my little bit. I mentioned the access only.
Can that be noted, Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. I've made a note of that.
Thank you. And Councillor Vickers?
Well, yes, the notes I've made, and I've got my MPPF version 2019 up on my screen, but what I read and noted earlier is that it would be, the reason for overdevelopment is that it fails to take local circumstances into account to reflect the needs of the area, which is NPPF 9. So a decision which didn't take the local circumstances, i.e. the existing lack of off-street parking for the residents. It is in effect removing a general amenity of the area which cannot be met elsewhere. And that, I think, is a statement of fact.
Councillor Abbs, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Noting that under NPPF 11C, this is not now an up-to-date plan, and policy P1 is part of the local plan, but wasn't part of previous decisions. So in fact, I agree with what Mr. Till said following my previous remarks. In fact, I think he was really supporting me in what he said firstly about the changes in the situation, in particular policy, since the previous inspector made those comments. And I believe policy P1 is a material consideration in the terms used in NPPF 12. And 92C in the NPPF says decisions should guard against unnecessary loss of valued facilities. Well, I think this is unnecessary in that the site could be developed without loss of parking facilities for the existing residents. And finally, 118 says we should give substantial weight to using brownfield land for identified needs and not just for homes. And there is an identified need for additional parking. And sorry, very finally, para 128 says that early proactive engagement with the community should be looked on more favourably than those applicants that don't. And we've heard from the objectors that there has been no engagement by the applicant with this group of residents.
Thank you,
That's it,
Councillor
really.
Vickers.
I hope that could actually help us defend a decision should we make a decision to refuse the application.
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. I have taken down Councillor Vickers' points, and in respect of failure to take account of local circumstances, that's something that certainly can be incorporated into the decision notice. I have some concerns regarding the unnecessary loss of valued facilities aspect, because we are talking again about the historic circumstances of the site and land ownership and transfer. Members need to be mindful that when dealing with a planning application, we need to deal with the circumstances of the site as it is now, and we can't address matters that were created as problems by previous owners of the site in terms of land transfer. Retrospectively, that isn't something that we can do, and I would be very concerned regarding adding that into a refusal reason.
Councillor Vickers, thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Vickers, would you be happy to strike that from?
Not really, no. Not really.
Councillor
I think we have to defend this.
To be honest, all this, so this is an opportunity to get all of the latest reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Mr. Till, did you want to come back finally? I'm going to put this to the vote.
Just to advise you, Councillor Bennyworth, that following this meeting, should the committee resolve to refuse the application for the reasons given, I'll be seeking guidance from senior management as to whether the application should be referred to the District Planning Committee.
Still, thank you very much. Okay.
Chairman, can we have more explanation from Mr. Till as to the reasons why? Is he saying it's grossly against policy?
Mr. Till.
Chairman, thank you. Councillor Hooker, my apologies for that lack of explanation. I am concerned that the decision would be contrary to the requirements of policy P1 and contrary to the NPPF in terms of taking into account matters that are beyond the remit of our local plan policies and planning in general regarding land ownership.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Cant, at the last minute.
Just to say I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Till's summary of this. I don't think any of the reasons offered by colleagues are supported in planning terms, and I think we're barking up the wrong tree despite the moral high ground they're taking, and that we would undoubtedly, in my view, be defeated at appeal.
Councillor Count, thank you. I'm afraid I share your concerns, but we have a proposal, and that is.
Sorry, Chairman, kind of a point of information, really. Well, I've just heard yourself made a comment which sounded like should have been a comment made in debate, and Mr. Councillor Kent also made a comment that I thought had been made in debate, as opposed to when we were discussing the conditions that should be applied to a duly elected proposal and executive thing that we should have been voted on by now. What is the situation? Can I have legal officers' advice on this? Are these debate type comments allowed at this stage?
Mrs. Armour, I'm going to put that to you.
I think, yes, once you've had a proposal and it's seconded, you should move to the vote. However, I think there's been a lot of comments tonight that have potentially been helpful, and to clarify the reasons.
I just that the reasoning given were almost off the officer, Mr. Till, certainly is entitled to the comment he made, but I'm not so clear as to why the chairman would like to influence the vote.
Councillor Abbs, I was merely expressing the concerns that I expressed.
Well, exactly, but that is something for debate, not during the actual voting process.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Abbs. That's noted. I'm now move to the vote itself, and that is the recommendation is that the Service Director of Development and Regulation refuse this planning application. This is proposed by Councillor Abbs and seconded by Councillor Vickers. I'm just going to take a show of hands, please. Thank you. And against? Is that
Councillor Crawley, you on the list.
And one abstention. Members, thank you very much indeed. And that planning application has been refused by this committee. Members of the public, thank you very much for attending this evening. Safe journey home. And members, I think we'll take that opportunity to have a 5-minute comfort break, and we'll reconvene at 2:15, just after 2:15, please.
meeting is now being streamed again, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chard. We now move on to the second application of the evening, 21/02022, land at Colborough Hill, Eastbury, Hungerford, Lambourne. Ms. Kirby, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
Chairman, if I may, I'd like to start the presentation actually just by saying something for members' benefit, because this is a slightly unusual application that comes before this committee. Members, this is a certificate of lawfulness application. It is unusual for the committee to consider. In determining this application, it's important to note that the decision must be based on matters of fact alone in reference to the evidence presented by the applicant and other parties. If the applicant's evidence indicates that the matters for which a certificate of lawfulness is sought are matters of fact, and there is no other evidence to contradict or to cast reasonable doubt on the applicant's version of events, the planning legislation directs the local planning authority to issue a certificate of lawfulness. The relevant considerations do not include in this case the usual material considerations such as the location of the works or national or local planning policies. I'll now pass you over to the planning officer for the introduction to the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Till. And over to you, Ms. Kirby.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Here we have an application for land at Colborough Hill in Eastbury, Hungerford. As Simon said, this application is for a certificate of lawfulness application for an existing use for retention of use of part of an existing stable building as an independent dwelling. This application is recommended for approval given the evidence. However, it's been brought to committee because over 10 letters of objection have been received. As you can see from the location and block plan, the residential development is just to the northern end of the permitted development. This includes a living kitchen and bathroom at ground floor and a mezzanine bedroom at first floor. The application site is located at Eastbury Fields at Colborough Hill, which is around 683 metres north of Eastbury settlement boundary. The site comprises of a stable building which was approved in 2007 and built in 2008, arranged adjacent to the road and is set within an area of curtilage of 0.17 hectares in total. The site is in private equine use and is grazed as grazing land for the applicant's horses. The application has been brought to committee as over 10 letters of objection have received. As my colleague has said, section 171B of the Town and Country Planning Act states that time limit for enforcement of change of use of all or part of a building to residential use is 4 years. The residential use is limited to the barn area only, with the stables remaining in private equine use. In considering the applicant's evidence, it is noted that residential occupation of the building has been provided with evidence, including utility bills, doctor's letters, electoral roll information, supporting resident letters, and a statutory declaration by the applicant. The evidence provided in utility bills, bank statements, TV license records, and electoral roll, and the letter from the doctor would appear to corroborate the applicant's versions of events that the stables have been in residential use by the applicant for a period of more than 4 years. The evidence submitted has been carefully assessed, and it's considered that on the balance of probabilities that part of the building has been used as an independent dwelling for a period of time in excess of 4 years. On the screen now is the application site as it is today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kirby. Mr. Goddard, would you like to make any comment on this?
I can do. Your highway service weren't actually consulted on this proposal, which is fair enough. There's plenty of space on the site to provide parking. And obviously any changes in traffic will be probably non-existent or very minimal. So we had no objection to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Speakers, we have no one from the from Lambourne Parish Council. I gather they're meeting this evening, so unable to attend. No objectors, supporters, or applicant or the agent. The ward member, Councillor Wollaston, I believe, is going to speak on behalf of the Parish Council and as ward member. Councillor Wollaston, if you would like to ready yourself, we'll start the clock and we'll begin when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a statement by Lambourne Parish Council. The site visit was attended by the Chair of the Parish Council, whereby it was stated that the applicant has satisfied the officers that they have been living at the Horse Yard and Paddock location for more than 4 years. It was specifically noted that the applicant had been able to register for the electoral roll at the address, and they had utility bills at the address going back more than 4 years. It was also stated there had been multiple complaints made about unlawful building at the location prior to the previous 4-year period, but that no enforcement notice was served, and this was dealt via officer discussions. Therefore, we wish to question the electoral roll registration, the previous complaints to planning enforcement, and the council's own core strategy development plan. With regard to establishing residence for the previous 4 years, getting utilities to a horse yard is not uncommon. Even recreation areas can have water and electricity, but that is all this land was supposed to be used for, a recreational horse yard and paddock. So to be able to get on the electoral roll from an address which is only designated as a recreational horse yard would require utilising a non-standard route. Firstly, to be eligible to get onto the electoral roll, you must have a qualifying address. So how does a recreational horse yard become a qualifying address? Or was the application made under a special category? We therefore ask this committee to refer this back to electoral services to investigate why a non-qualifying address was used to register for the electoral roll, or to explain how this address came to be used. Until this is addressed, we will maintain this will be illegal to certify as an independent dwelling. To address the previous complaints to planning enforcement, whilst the planning officers today can only go on what they were presented with for this application for the certification the planning committee have a more holistic view of the broader picture. Many of you will be aware that the previous district planning council conferences run by West Berkshire Council in the past 6 years, it has been stated to the planning team themselves that there is insufficient enforcement officers and a backlog which is unachievable to address. Therefore, the lack of understanding with regards to why have previous enforcement notices not been issued and why have local concerns not been addressed becomes somewhat clearer. Has a lack of resource in the council led to members of the community being ignored? And while council at the site's visit state that the residents have the right to make complaints and alert the council to issues in this case, it appears that complaints have fallen on deaf ears. If residents are to have any confidence in the council, they need to know they are being heard, respected, and actions are being taken. So we ask the committee to consider failings to properly investigate and document the complaints and outcomes to the public and transparent standard. Furthermore, we ask you to consider that if these have been properly investigated with evidence to support, would the application be before you today? With regard to the OMB, the council has a core strategy development plan document, which was adopted in July 2012 and covers until 2026, therefore covering more than the 4-year period leading up to this application. In the core strategy document, the OMB is the subject of Policy 5, where it states the North West Downs area of outstanding national beauty will be a place where the landscape is managed to conserve and enhance its natural beauty. In accordance with its national designation, in accordance with its national designation. In addition, within the core strategy, the objective regarding housing growth states that homes will be deliverable in an effective and timely manner, will maximise the use of suitable brownfield land and access to facilities and services, and will be developed at densities which will make the most efficient use of land whilst responding to the existing built environment. How then does this application fit the council's own strategy? Therefore, the Lambourne Parish Council makes 3 requests within our objection to the application for the certification. They are: 1, we ask the committee to consider failings to properly investigate and document the complaints made by residents in the years leading up to now. 2, we ask this committee to refer this back to electoral services to investigate the legality of registering this address for electoral roll purposes. And 3, we ask the committee to not reference this case for future considerations, but rather to act now in line with the council's own core strategy development plan and reject this application as it falls outside all provisions made in its agreed public document.
I imagine you've finished there. You had 1 minute left to go, but
just a few observations from my own. I find this personally a very sad case. I'm convinced by planning officers that we have no option, but I think it's completely wrong.
Thank you very
That's
much.
all I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, questions of the ward member. I've got Councillor Barnett first, please.
Through you, Chairman. Councillor Wilson, I take it that was not necessarily your personal view.
As I said, I was stating that.
It was, okay, right. Well, you might or might not wish to answer this point I was going to say. And the question was very much related to enforcement. Do you feel, and you possibly won't give me the answer, but I'm going to ask the question, do you feel that this case would have been undertaken in a different way if we'd actually been having a, let's say, enhanced number of enforcement officers to actually check the area in greater depth?
I was not a board member or a council stage, but my understanding is that at the time when these were first raised, we had a substantial enforcement team. Of the last decade. So that's all I can ask you about it.
Before I move on, I'll turn to Mr. Till, who is in a position, I think, to elaborate on that question, Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I can't comment in the Western Area Planning Committee meeting regarding enforcement or resources. I can't comment on investigations that may or may not have taken place regarding enforcement. I was an enforcement officer when this building was originally investigated by the enforcement team. I investigated the matter of a window being inserted in the building in an unauthorised fashion, and also noted the insertion of a mezzanine floor. Those are matters of fact, and therefore they are relevant to the committee's consideration, so I can disclose them, but I can't comment regarding enforcement resources, and I would suggest that a meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee is not the appropriate environment for that matter to be discussed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Vickers, please.
If this is thought to be relevant, my question is about the precedent that this might set, and using the ward members' local knowledge. How many stable yards are there that are so remote from a residential area? Because one can understand with valuable livestock like racehorses, well, certainly racehorses, but even with recreational horses, you do need to have someone on site to keep an eye on them because they can be stolen, frankly. So is this a common situation that could be repeated if we're not careful? That somebody could sort of decide to sort of bring a sleeping bag to their barn and then gradually convert it to a proper home and
I'm not sure that it was part of the presentation, and I'm not sure.
Well, you did refer to his concern about this happening in the area and how it was, well, we've had, okay. So you don't want to allow it?
I think not.
All right.
I think
right. Saves time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Abbs.
Sorry, Chair, put me. It's a question for the officer. I realised it was.
Okay, thank you. Members, any further questions of the ward member? Okay, we'll have questions now, please, to the officers.
No.
Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Till, when did you go? When did you spot this?
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. That seems like a natural question, especially as we're considering evidence of longevity of use. As I've mentioned already, the unauthorised works that I investigated consisted of insertion of a window, and I also noted a mezzanine had been put within the building. That wouldn't have been unauthorised works, having been internal only. I do not have the specific date, but I was an enforcement officer working for the compliance and monitoring of development in the district between 2007 and mid-2011. So it would have fallen between those dates, and I would suggest more likely around 2009 to 2010.
And in fact, all the evidence is much later than that anyway. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any further questions of officers? Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. One really pedantic point on page 21, it's got councillors Abbs, Marsh and Vickers as the councillors. So does that win a prize as pedantic point of the evening?
Well, if it does, you get second prize, Councillor.
Oh, has it? Oh, my apologies, Councillor Cole. Thank you for that. Mr. Till, just one question on page 26. It says an enforcement letter was sent in June 2010. So presumably that wasn't followed up. What kind of recourse do we have as a council if we send out a planning enforcement letter and then it's not followed up?
Thank you, Councillor Culver. I can't comment on the content of that letter. It's very likely it may have been associated with my investigation, and my investigation led to the unauthorised window that had been inserted in the building being sealed back up again. In terms of recourse to further enforcement action, where requests from the council for something to happen aren't honoured, then we would make an assessment of the unauthorised works and the expediency of taking action where we were aware that those requests hadn't been actioned by the site owner. As I say, I can't comment on any enforcement investigations following the one that I was involved in.
Chair, can I just quickly ask for clarification? So we don't have a schedule of going back to check that people have actually abided by our planning enforcement? Presumably we'd have to rely on the local people to say, hold on a minute, this hasn't been effected.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we are veering into the territory where this doesn't relate to the evidence associated with the application. I've discussed the evidence and my knowledge of it, and I think questions regarding planning enforcement and how action is taken are probably something to be taken up with the enforcement team outside this meeting.
Not in this chamber tonight, perhaps. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. If this is just sort of theoretical, really. If a full planning application had been submitted, similar to the one that was submitted in 2007 for the demolition stables and replacement, would you have approved this application?
Councillor Cole, I can't comment on a planning application that hasn't been submitted, I can comment in broad terms that the principle for new residential developments would be it would be a presumption against in this area as it's a countryside location. Whether there was a case for a redundant building, that would fall under other policy, but you'll be aware that detailed consideration goes into reviewing a planning application, and I can't do that off the cuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. COVID. We all went into lockdown. Does that have any effect on any of the legislation that we can be concerned? Evidence, yes, 4 years, yes, but if we all had to stay indoors, nobody can go anywhere or do anything. So does that give us anything at all? The fact that we're all locked indoors?
Thank you, Chairman. There are certain cases in which COVID and the deliberate hiding of works during the COVID period would potentially come into play in terms of an enforcement investigation and subsequent action, namely the time limit for enforcement action being taken. However, there is no evidence of a deliberate attempt by the applicant to conceal that she was living at this address. The electoral roll register record displays it. The doctor's surgery record displays it. The local community have written to us, and in terms of evidence we can glean from their objections, they have stated that they complained regarding the residential occupation of this site. And in addition, the 4-year period commenced considerably before the pandemic period hit. So no, I'm afraid in this circumstance, it's my professional view that the pandemic wouldn't play a part in whether members can consider the 4 years.
May I just test that with you a little further, if I may? I'm looking through, as we've already heard, water bills, electricity bill, phone bills, they're not unusual for they don't say residents, they just say that those features are connected. TV license definitely says, oh, hang on a minute, someone's more likely, it could be business, and that doesn't start till 2016. So that's, the rest of it is, again, it doesn't have to mean residency in the evidence, but the TV license is the most convincing thing I've said there, which is why I raised the COVID thing, because if I can safely go, well, that's not real evidence, but your TV license didn't start until September 2016. So therefore your 4 years would have been 2020. Hang on a minute, we're in COVID.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Abbs, the relevant test here is whether the evidence is in any way contradicted. Now, the evidence doesn't just lean on TV licence, utilities bills, it also leans on the statutory declaration, a legal document submitted by the applicant, and the evidence of letters corroborating it. Now, if there was evidence here that shed any doubt on those matters, then that would be evaluated as well, but we do not have any evidence that contradicts it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. I've got Councillor Cant.
Thank you. Mr. Till, just a very brief question. Is it permissible to attach conditions to this permitted development in the sense of saying, I mean, my concern would be, I guess, that we give carte blanche to this individual to go on to sell this part of this estate as a private dwelling for a substantial profit. I mean, are we able to put the conditions we would put on any other sort of agricultural stroke racing use that we've done in other applications? Or do we have to just accept it as it is?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid that it's not possible to apply conditions to a certificate of lawfulness.
Thank you, Councillor Hooker.
Thank you. Mr. Till, I couldn't quite work out from Councillor Wollaston's presentation. This person was on the electoral roll, am I right? That application of when that went in, did the council then, as a part of putting that name on the electoral roll, make a decision that this was a bona fide address already?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Hooker, I'm afraid that I don't work in electoral services. It's my assumption that they require evidence to confirm that it is a bona fide address. But I'm afraid I'm not able to give you advice regarding the electoral services, their actual processes.
Thank you. Does that not therefore lead us down to the decision of approval?
Is that a question to Mr. Till?
I'm sorry. Could you reframe the question, please, Councillor?
The fact that it's been designated as a bona fide residence, therefore, does not the lawfulness therefore apply automatically?
Thank you, Councillor Hooker. Thank you, Chairman. As I said to Councillor Abbs, the test here is whether any of the evidence contradicts the applicant's own evidence. So your officer's recommendation is that no evidence presented to us contradicts the applicant's version of events, and therefore we've recommended approval. Members, this application has been brought in front of you due to 10 objections being received to it, and therefore the requirements of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Barnett.
I believe there's no postcode for the property, is that correct?
Thank you, Chairman. There are many sites up and down the district that there isn't a postcode for. I'm not aware actually whether there is an official postcode for this, but I don't think there's one being included within the application.
Through you, Chairman, we had to go by the road when we went for the site visit, didn't we? We couldn't put a postcode into our sat nav, could we?
Quite right, Councillor Barnett. Mr. Goddard, I see your hand raised there. Do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I might be able to help because my team actually deals with street naming and numbering. We give official addresses to properties. Now, quite often across the council, council tax, electoral registration, will have a property on their databases in order to provide a council service, collect council tax, or give the individual there a vote, which they're entitled to have. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the property has an address. It enables the property to be given an address later on in the process. My team does not give an official address until the planning status is clarified, i.e. that there's a planning consent on the site, that there's a residential dwelling. We would then issue it with an official address. We would then consult with the Royal Mail, who would then give the postcode. The Royal Mail gives the postcode when they know that we've given an official address. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Councillor Barnett, you're satisfied?
Well, just to follow up, my mind was quickly thinking in another direction. The Peace Women, of course, in Greenham, they had a vote, didn't they? But they didn't have a formal address. That's another issue.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vickers.
Well, the same point, because I was the ward member for Kintbury during the building of the bypass, and I actually helped some of the people who were living up a tree to get themselves on the electoral register because they are entitled to do it. A homeless person is entitled to be on the register. It doesn't prove that the address on the register is a legal approved residence, but it just enables them to get a vote. And also because my background is in looking at national geodata policy and how various data sets work together, I just confirm what Mr. Goddard said. That is, you don't get a postcode until the Royal Mail believe that the local authority is satisfied that this is a legal address.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. We're wandering into debate here slightly here. Councillor Cole.
Thank
Questions
you.
of officers.
Yeah, it is. Can you confirm or otherwise that policy CS19 can't be considered in this application simply because it's an application for existing use and a lawful development certificate?
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that none of the policies of the local plan or the national planning policies can be considered where we're considering a lawful development certificate.
Thank you, despite this being a substandard dwelling.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, despite this being a dwelling that might not be considered up to standard.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. Despite the interesting pursuit of various highways and byways, it appears to me the conclusion is that this is something we can't avoid, and I'd like to propose that we move to approve the.
We're just on questions of officers at the moment. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reinforce again that there is no possibility of putting any conditions on this. I have in mind the possibility of no further spread of residential in the area, or possibly confirmation of connection to the sewerage system.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I can set your mind at rest slightly in that respect. Although it's not possible to apply planning conditions, the certificate of lawfulness relates strictly to the land that is outlined in red on the location plan for the development. It doesn't grant residential use for anything beyond the unauthorised residential dwelling that is currently on the site.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Wollaston, is that you're satisfied there? I think we're done on questions of clarification of the officers. I'll open this up now, please, to debate. Councillor Hooker? No? Councillor Cole?
Thank you, Chairman. My comments really are, whilst it's perfectly legal to submit an application like this, it's always been my view that it's circumventing the planning process and that we should really prefer to see a full application for a proposal like this. And I think it's a bit of a loophole in the planning process. It's self-evident from the bills produced that the intention's always been to live on the site, and it's substandard accommodation, as I've said, and it's unfortunate that there appears to be a apparent lack of communication between services within the authority, which could have prevented this from happening. We are where we are, but in my view, two wrongs don't make a right. But I don't quite know where we would go if we refuse this application. I think we're in a real quandary here. But I think the way in which it's been presented to us is, in my view, unsatisfactory. And just as an aside, there was another application in Lambourne, which on a site visit that members made, we discovered that some stabling for polo ponies had been converted into accommodation, and that brought forward a planning application. So it happens in remote areas, and we need to be vigilant.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. I've got Councillor Vickers next, please.
Chairman, I agree with Councillor Kant. I think we've got no option other than to propose accepting recommendation. But I do feel that the public who brought this to a public meeting, the objectors, deserve a public record of what we think needs to happen going forward. I know that might not normally be something that we do in Western area planning, but it's a very unusual item on our agenda. And I don't know where else the public will get a record of what we've said so far. And more importantly, I think what we're going to do to stop it happening again. So unless I'm assured that that's already sufficiently minuted, that's all I'd say. Maybe something for an informative.
Or possibly putting forward to a PAG potentially.
Yeah, if it's relevant for PAG, it's an odd one because, as we said, it falls completely outside the local plan. It's an enforcement issue, and I don't know where that belongs. I mean, as the opposition spokesman, I can have a conversation with the head of, the relevant head of that service, but that's not a public thing. And I think as it's brought to a public meeting, the public deserve to know the answer, particularly whether this is going to form a precedent.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I'm going to go to Councillor Kant next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I have another attempt to propose that under the circumstances, we approve the recommendation of the planning officer?
Thank you, Councillor Kant. I'll take that as a proposal. Does that find a seconder?
I did propose it at the start of my remarks, so I'm happy to second it. I don't care who. Yeah.
Are we happy with that arrangement, gentlemen? Thank you. So I'll take that as a second by Councillor Vickers. Members, anything further to add on this one? No, Councillor Abbs, please.
No, Chairman, I should have mentioned it, but I'm just confused about, with the red line is so small, I'm not sure how, if we've just given occupancy, residency permission, how the hell do you get in and out? How does anything happen for all the bits that are necessary to go along with living? I'm very confused how this gives any rights to live there or in any sustainable way without doing more things that will need planning permission. But
Mr. Till, did you want to touch on that before we go to the vote?
Thank you, Chairman. This is different to a planning application in that you are only considering whether unauthorised use of a building as residential has taken place. So the red line is limited to the location where that unauthorised use has taken place, and strictly limited. In fact, the only alteration that the LPA can make in terms of plans would be to further restrict the red line if it had justification for taking the view that the residential use had taken place on an even smaller piece of land, a piece of the building. As it is, we're satisfied that the red line represents where the unauthorised residential use has taken place in terms of the part of the building, and that the application correctly represents the unauthorised residential use. We don't. The answer is we don't need to consider additional space because there's nothing in the evidence that justifies that any further use of additional space has been made in an unauthorised fashion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Abbs, does that satisfy?
Yeah, I was just thinking about when she puts a garden. Sorry, I don't know if it's a she. When the person puts a garden in and wants this and wants that, and anyway, it's not for now.
Councillor Vickers, your hand's still up. Is that? No? Okay, members, we have a proposal from Councillor Cant, seconded by Councillor Vickers. Recommendation is that the Service Director for Development and Regulation grant permission. This is proposed, as I said, by Councillor Cant, seconded by Councillor Vickers. Members, a show of hands in favour, please. Jack, you happy with that? A show of hands, members, please. We're just taking.
I'm abstaining.
I'm sorry. Yep, I'm just for the record. We, Councillor Cole, Vickers, Cant, Booker, Barnett, Bennyworth.
I've got them all.
You have. Yeah. Thank you. Members against? Councillor Abbs, thank you. Abstain? Winston Kohler. Members, thank you very much indeed. Okay, mindful of the time, we'll move swiftly on to the final application of the evening, 20/02922/full, 39 Newbury Street, Lambourne. I'm going to go straight to Mr. Till for the presentation. Mr. Till.
Excuse me.
Councillor Cole.
Mindful of the time, are we going to, I suspect we may need to vote.
We may well, if we give it...
Need to vote to continue till 10:30. I know, was assuming that we'll complete the business by 10:30. Well,
this clock is set at British summertime rather than...
Yeah, it's 9:30 now.
Yeah.
I'd second that. I do think we need a vote because otherwise people are wasting their time staying even now if we're not going to finish by 10:30. But I think we can finish by 10:30, but we need to have the vote to extend time.
Now. Well, proposed by Councillor Cole. Thank you. Councillor Vickers seconded. In favour, members? Thank you very much. So moving swiftly on, presentation please from Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. If you could just bear with me while I share my screen. Thank you, Chairman. Members, this application is for the demolition of an existing bungalow at 39 Newbury Street and the redevelopment of the site into 4 3-bedroom houses with associated parking and amenity areas. It's been called to committee due to receiving more than 10 letters of objection. The application site is located within the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty and within the defined settlement of Lambourne, where there's an established presumption in favour of new residential developments. I'll now take you through some photography of the site. This is a view from the site of the existing bungalow from outside the neighbouring access. This is a view looking southwest. This is a view of the highway verge with Station Road in the background looking south. This is a view of the site behind the highway's verge on the left, existing access and front wall side elevation of number 37 Newbury Street. And this is a view of the junction of Newbury Street and Station Road. This is a view of the verge and the properties along Station Road and adjacent to the site. This is a view of the site from Station Road looking north. This is from the rear garden of the existing bungalow. And these are the, this is the proposed site layout. The following slides are the proposed elevations. And the following two slides are indicative 3D representations of the proposed dwellings. And these are the visibility displays from the access. Members, it's important to note that in 2017, the committee resolved to approve permission for a similar building that proposed to that proposed, which comprised of 2 one-bedroom flats and 4 two-bedroom flats. This was subject to completion of a legal agreement to secure affordable housing that is currently in its late stages of preparation. The committee's resolution on the 2017 application is a material consideration in the current application, and following completion of the legal agreement will result in approval of an alternative scheme that can be implemented on the site. These are the elevations for that scheme. Members will note that they're quite similar to those proposed in the current scheme. Members, turning to the objections to this application, concerns have been raised in respect of overdevelopment, impact on the character and appearance of the area OMB, impact on parking provision and highway safety, prominence in the street scene, and concerns with the drainage of foul water of flooding and refuse storage. In respect of impact on the character and appearance of the area, the site is a corner plot traversing 2 building lines. The proposed works have been set back to meet the building line along Station Road and set deep into the plot on Newbury Street. The building itself is designed in a terrace style, which officers consider response to the mixed character of the street scene. And while the design is quite modern, it also borrows from traditional elements of house design and is therefore considered to respond appropriately to its surroundings. You'll note there is a change of levels within the street scene, and the provided drawings show that the proposed works have been designed to transition this. As it is important that the proposed works respect the surrounding ridge heights, a condition on ground and finished floor levels has been recommended. In respect to parking provision and highway safety, Highways have scrutinised this application and are raising no objections on either matter, subject to conditions regarding inter alia, the provision of visibility displays and parking spaces, and stopping up of the existing access. The proposed works provide a policy compliant level of parking. Turning to the issue that has been of considerable concern in responses to this application and at the site visit last week, you'll note that Thames Water have issued a response in respect of sewage infrastructure capacity and surface water that the case officer has addressed at 6.2 of the report. This response that states that no objections are raised in terms of sewage infrastructure capacity, provided that surface water is addressed by appropriate on-site drainage measures. You'll note that condition 5 requires a comprehensive set of measures for the provision and maintenance of SUDs to achieve this. On this point, I should also note that foul water infrastructure is a matter for the statutory undertaker, Thames Water, and the developer to address sufficiently. It is not properly a planning matter, and in this case, officers are satisfied that the planning aspects of the issue are addressed comprehensively by the requirements of condition 10, as well as any flood risk concerns associated with the critical drainage areas surrounding the site, and the lead local flood authority has raised no objections to the application. In respect of concerns regarding bin storage, the case officer has noted that adequate bin stores are proposed to be located to the front of each dwelling. Turning to 6.1 of the report, the case officer has provided an assessment of the impact on neighbouring amenity. Of particular note is that the outlook of dwellings on the opposite side of Newbury Street would be altered, and that the proposed works would result in some additional overlooking of the rear garden of 37 Newbury Street. However, neither input would be so severe as to be untypical of the relationship between buildings in many suburban areas, including those in the surrounding area in Lambourne. It is also worth noting that the impacts would be similar to those associated with the flats that the committee has already previously resolved to approve in 2017, and that the legal agreement is in process for at present. Finally, members, I'll note that there is no update information for this application and conclude that your officers consider the proposed works acceptable and therefore recommend this application for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Mr. Goddard, would you like to make any comment from a highways point of view, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can do. The proposal complies with policy P1 with provision of 10 parking spaces, equaling 2.5 spaces per 3-bed house, which is the standard that is applied in this part of the district. The new access being proposed is of sufficient width, and the sight lines onto the public highway are also comply to your standards. Considering the existing bungalow, I would anticipate an increase in traffic of some 18 vehicle movements per day, 9 in, 9 out. Considering all the traffic that already uses the highway in the vicinity, I would not consider that the proposal will lead to any detrimental impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. We now move on to our speakers. From the Parish Council, no representative tonight. Objectors, we have Louise Wilkin joining us on Zoom. Mr. Chard, if you'd be good enough to bring Louise Wilkin into the room, please.
Yeah, Ms. Wilkin is with us in the chamber.
Good
Virtually.
evening, Ms. Wilkin. Would you be good enough, please, to unmute yourself?
Here we are.
And we can hear you. Can you say something?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Perfect. We can indeed. I'm sure you've been following us avidly all evening, and you know exactly how this is going to go. You've had 5 minutes to speak. 4 minutes into that, I'll give you a minute warning, and then 10 seconds to wrap up your piece.
Before you start timing me, I have to say it's been absolutely fascinating and a real insight to see what you all do and how much consideration you give to all these applications. I've never been to one of your meetings before, but it's been really, really interesting. I almost gave up, but I thought I will wait and see if
well, thank you very much for
get round to us. But
thank you very much for staying with us.
A real eye-opener.
When you're good and ready, Louise, we'll start the clock.
Okay, so well, I don't think we're going to get very far on this because, as I understand it, and has just been said, there is a previous application for this site which slipped through and is just waiting on a technicality. So this evening, you simply have to make a choice really about which design to pass, I think, which will be, from my point of view, the lesser of two evils. Our objections are the same. But nonetheless, I'm grateful to have this platform really to present the case for local knowledge against the big boys, Thames Water. Now, Thames Water say there is no problem with wastewater and sewage. You've gone over this, and this is true, but it's only partially true. In reality, whilst the pipes can take the sewage, they can't cope with the extra load when it rains, and it rains a lot here. Groundwater and rainwater seep into the pipes, and this causes flooding. We have an interesting mix of raw sewage in the roads, tampons, toilet paper, wet wipes, you name it, and we've seen it in our streets. This has been going on for years, 20 years and so, and Thames Water has only recently really begun to address the issue properly by lining the drains. Even now, the project is not completed, so the temporary fix is to bring mobile pumps which collect the water and the sewage filter it, then feed it into the River Lambourne. We, the residents, have had enough of the filthy streets, the noisy pumps, and the dirty river water. However Thames Water phrases it, the fact is that the Lambourne drains are not fit for purpose. They can't deal with the village as it is, and we're asking you really to stop allowing more new homes to be built until Thames Water are really on top of things. My other comment was about highways. Here again, we've got a conflict between theory and reality, and this has been debated earlier on with Pond Close. It's fine if you look at the site map, which and surely its visibility signs are great, because the site map doesn't show any parking. It shows an empty road. In reality, in Lambourne, we have 2 buses, one to Swindon, one to Newbury, and they only run on weekdays. People need cars out here, and lots of the older houses in Lambourne don't have garages, or they're too small, as you were saying previously. So street parking is very common. And indeed, the side roads adjacent to this site are already full most of the time. The inevitable overspill from this site, it's got to happen. I know your regulations for parking, but it's always going to be more. The inevitable spill will go onto the main road, Newbury Street. This is a narrow village road, and there are 2 blind bends, one on either side of the site. Incidentally, the plans don't stretch quite far enough to show them. And we have already problems just around the corner with the Nippy Chippy fish and chips place, with street parking and people driving around the blind bend on the wrong side of the road. So I would say at the very least, please ensure that your sight lines are kept clear by putting double yellow lines along this stretch of Newbury Street. I know the decision is just about made, but I wanted to bring to your attention, more than anything, our frustration with the Thames Water and the flooding that we get down the High Street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you'd be good enough to hang around, Ms. Wilkin, we've got some questions. I'm going to start with Councillor Vickers.
My question, Ms. Wilkin, is about the Thames Water situation that you began with. Do you know whether Thames Water have revealed whether the problem when there's a surge during heavy rain, whether that's because of leakage into the foul pipe, or is it because parts of the system are what's known as combined drainage? In other words, they were built taking both foul and surface water, which was the case until at least the 1930s, and parts of Lambourne are quite old, but shouldn't be the case going forward. But if, of course, it's already a combined sewer and there is leakage, then it is likely to take it over the 100% and flood. So have Thames Water, perhaps through your local flood forum, explained why this is happening?
I understand that it's simply sewage pipes, and the water leaks in through the leaks that are in the pipes because they're very old. They have started lining them, but they haven't finished lining them yet. Lining
should sort it then if it's not caused by an overloaded combined sewage system. Yeah,
it should do, but it hasn't. They haven't finished it yet, and all the while it's not finished. Houses are being built, and we carry on getting the flooding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Ms Wilkin, for coming along tonight and for waiting for so long to give your contribution. Could you expand a bit? You mentioned the unfortunate incidents of foul water and items being on the street. Can you tell us how often that happens? And also you mentioned about on-street parking. We've seen some pictures tonight which don't seem to show that there is a problem with on-street parking. Would you say those pictures don't sufficiently represent the reality?
Yes, so the pictures, yes, the pictures I don't think represent the reality, because there's a small street, in Newbury Street, there's no parking now because there's only that small bungalow, and even before, when the people who own the house lived there, they had one, maybe 2 cars, which fitted quite nicely onto the drive. Now there's a lady who's renting it, and I'm not sure she's got a car. the off-street parking is down the two roads which come to that junction. So Tubbs Farm Close, which is always full, and Station Road, which on the day you had the site visit, sadly there was nobody parked there, but normally it's very busy. That was your first question. Your second question was how often do the floods, was that your question?
Yes, how often have you found that there's items on the street that have come from the drains?
Oh, we get it every year. Every time it rains, we get this sort of thing on in the streets. It can be this, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always as unpleasant as that, but
members, any further questions? Ms. Wilkin, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and staying at this late hour. I'm going to ask Mr. Chard to take you back to the waiting room. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Member supporters, we have none. Applicant agent, none. I'm going to move on to ward member, Councillor Wollaston.
You'll be pleased how I'm going to be fairly brief. Given there is no objection from Lambourne Parish Council, and there was an extant planning consent subject to sign the 106 agreement, I can't really see any real grounds to object to this scheme, which in my judgment is more sympathetic to the adjoining properties than the previous almost consented scheme. I do appreciate the concerns regarding drainage, which Mrs. Wilkins explained. This has been an ongoing issue for many years, and it's caused by groundwater penetration into the old Victorian pipes. I chair the Lambourne Valley Flood Forum. I know that Thames Water gradually line all the pipes down the valley and sealing manholes as well. This work has been completed, to my knowledge, in this location, and I can therefore see no reason to refuse this application. Thank you, Jim.
Councillor Wollaston. Members, any questions of the ward member? No. Questions of clarification from officers, please. I've got Councillor Abbs.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chairman, sorry. I was looking at the application itself. It very clearly says 8 parking spaces. 8. And when I look through the order of material, it shows 8, 10, 11. You can choose your diagram and choose your number, basically. If we were inclined to say yes to this, are we approving what's in the application, which is 8? Are we actually approving 10 or 11? Is it condition? You see where I'm going with it. So what's right, basically.
Mr. Goddard.
Chairman, originally there were 8 parking spaces provided. Your highway officers objected to that because it didn't comply with policy P1, which required 10 parking spaces. And therefore we have received amended plans that do show 10 parking spaces. And therefore those are the plans that we should be working to.
So it doesn't matter that the application still says 8. Is that correct?
I would need to advise.
No, I think I'll turn to Mr. Till of clarification on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the application description is to demolish the existing bungalow and redevelopment to provide 4 number 3-bedroom dwelling houses with associated parking and amenity areas. The application description does not refer to the number of parking spaces. Amended plans were received during consideration of the application. Those are included within the approved plans or the plans for approval list, and they would be what the parking standard is based on.
As long as I've got a surety it really is 10 and they can't just fall back to 8 here, then I'm fine. So,
thank you very much, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. 6.15 does mention 10 parking spaces. But my question is, would we not usually have 1 electric vehicle charging point per home? We've only got 2. Should we not have 4?
Mr. Till, do you want to take that, or was that one for Mr. Goddard?
Chairman, that the electric vehicle charging points, have been provided in such a way that they can serve 4 parking spaces.
Sorry, I missed that last bit, Mr. Goddard.
The electric vehicle charging points have been placed between 2 spaces each.
Okay.
So therefore, 4 parking spaces have access to electric vehicle charging point.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Councillor Barnett.
Probably a question through you to Mr. Till. The retaining wall in station, or retaining, I think it was concrete blocks, if I remember rightly, retaining the bank on Station Road. And then at the front, there's obviously a brick built wall out onto Newbury Street, which meant that the actual level was probably about this high from the actual street itself. How far is the actual footings of the building going to be dug down? Because I'm just trying to establish the issue in relationship to height against the the first building in Station Road.
Thank you, Chairman. The depth of the footings is not relevant to the eventual height of the building. The depth of the footings will be as deep as it needs to be in order to provide a ceiling height for the rooms within the buildings. It won't affect the ridge height, which is set within the planning application details as a height above ground level. Now, in terms of that height above ground level, there is a condition on the recommended conditions list to secure details of the levels in order to establish both the depth and each finished floor level to ensure that the ridge level remains what it's set at within the planning drawings themselves. Clearly, that ridge level is transitional between the 2 lines of dwellings, respecting the fact that levels do change over the site. So in terms of the actual depth of the dwellings, I don't have confirmation of that because I don't have confirmation of the levels at ground level that are set. That will be provided via discharge of conditions, but it won't affect the overall height and appearance of the buildings.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vickers.
Yeah, it's to do with that retaining wall in particular, with a considerable change of level and therefore earth movement that's going to be involved. I understand, as I understand it, it was said on the site visit that the wall itself is not within the red line. So my question is this going to be covered by planning or by building regs or by private civil action if there is damage caused by this development to the existing retaining wall and the earth moving? What I wouldn't want to happen is that it slips through as a minor amendment and that affects the change of the ridge height. And that has happened in my previous ward without members realising until basically they topped out the building and it was too late and unreasonable to knock it down. So how do we deal with the possibility, I think, which is quite real, that retaining wall could be damaged and we might have to look at changes of level, or, how does that get dealt with? Is it a planning matter or not?
Councillor Vickers. Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. It isn't a planning matter. It is a matter that is for civil legislation. It is quite clearly a civil engineering problem and not something that planning can address. Planning can, however, address the overall ridge height and seek to ensure that the buildings are constructed to the height that is shown on the plans.
Just to pursue it, I mean, how would that be done? Because I can envisage, having been a builder myself, that you don't go anywhere near planning. A clerk of work, you bring the clerk of works on site and you say, I can't do this without changing the levels. And then the levels get changed. And the next thing you know is you're getting reports from the locals saying it's not built to the ridge heights that it should have been. Is there some communication between, I don't know, building control and planners to say, look, we've got a problem here. We're going to need to amend your planning condition regards levels?
Chairman, we're really venturing outside of the matters that form part of consideration of this planning permission in terms of discussing internal procedures within the council for notifying different departments of the council of potentially unauthorised works. To bring us back onto the subject of the planning application before us somewhat, if it was noted that works were being constructed in an unauthorised fashion, then the local planning authority would have to review those works, investigate any breach of control, and make a decision as to whether it was expedient to take formal action to have the works reverted to what was approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Okay, members, I think we're done. I'm going to open this up for debate. Who'd like to start me on the debate? Thank you, Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, I think in all, everybody doesn't seem to have any too many objections to this one at all. My only note is two letters and two numbers, which are missing again from another application for building stuff. So you can imagine which letters and numbers they are. CS15 if you can't figure it out. And I'm just wondering if we could condition it. Rather, so I go to approve it as long as CS15 is adhered to, and then go with our statement about, well, you should be doing net zero homes by now. So,
Mr. Till.
Chairman, I find it difficult to frame a wording for a condition that doesn't refer properly to the policies of our local plan. And as I've advised earlier in this meeting, policy CS15 does not seek to provide net zero on minor residential development, which this is. With respect to the views expressed earlier, the Code for Sustainable Homes, which did state that, has been abolished, and therefore we can't refer to the Code for Sustainable Homes. So in terms of giving a reason for that condition, which is required to be to relate properly to the policies of the local plan, I'm at a loss for how I would frame that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to register that it's disappointing that nobody proposing this application this evening actually turned up to make their views known. I think it's a bit strange to put in a planning application and then not actually turn up and take the opportunity to address the public's concerns and reassure them. And I've completely forgotten the second point, so I'll come back, sorry.
I'll go to Councillor Vickers first while you try and work that one out.
Chairman, I don't think there's a great deal to debate here, and I'm quite happy to propose this application, although I have my reservations about how the issues that I raised will be managed. But, you know, that's really up to local intelligence and eyes and ears. If you don't trust your building control officer, keep walking past and, you know, spread the word if you think something wrong's happening.
Because that is a proposal. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Cole, thank you. Members, anything further to add on this? Councillor Culver, did you?
I've remembered my point, but maybe it's too late now that a proposal's been made.
No,
I was just going to say, I think it's all very well Thames Water saying they've got no objection, but there's clearly a problem there with items coming out in the foul water. So, I mean, I know that's not a consideration for planning, but I think it's ironic that they say there's no objection when there is actually a problem. So I just want to put that on record, especially bearing in mind what we know about the amount of discharge there is into local rivers. And this is obviously a problem out on the streets as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Members, I have a proposal from Councillor Vickers, seconded Councillor Cole. Recommendation, the Service Director for Development and Regulation grant permission. May I take a show of hands, please, in favour? And against? It's Councillor Abbs, and I think that was everyone. No abstentions there. Members, thank you very much. Before we wind up here, I'd just like to ask members, for the last meeting, we didn't wipe down our desks in a COVID compliant way. Well, maybe it was just me in that case, and I'll hold my hand up. Thank you very much. A long evening, some very good debate, and thank you very much indeed. Sleep well.